And you're quoting Genesis, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills were covered.
Wow.
Not because I'm, trying to pump the biblical flood model. I'm far from it. What I am trying to throw out in pictures whenever I realize here's a great quote, and it doesn't matter where it's from because there's so many flood legends you can quote from.
Well, the biblical flood model is it is one of those myths, is one of those traditions that have come down, one of thousands of traditions that speak of this. The whole ancestral memory of the human race is telling us that something terrible happened.
It's also very unfortunate that's all connected with an ideology that a lot of people find problematic. Like that there's this issues with that being, religion, or a cult, or there's a faith-based belief system.
We must immediately realize the flood is not the property of the monotheistic religions.
Exactly.
The flood is found in every culture on earth.
Also, in that a lot of these stories, you're talking about massive translations from ancient Hebrew to Latin to Greek, and a lot is lost in the process. And you're dealing with a lot of these stories were handed down from generation to generation for what was it, 1,000 years before the first version was ever written?
Absolutely.
So that is unbelievably fascinating.
Go to 1014, 1014, and we'll see a
Test.
map.
Whoa. Now that you know, it's crazy. It looks like something just like you had a sand castle or some flat sand set up, and a wave came in and cut through it and then pulled back.
The wave came from the north, and it swept down over the landscape and basically carved and plucked and quarried and gouged and gashed that landscape. And this is one of the places Graham and I went. If you look right in there, you'll see where it says Grand, part of Grand Coulee, Grand. Right there where the D is, we have a great video clip.
Like you had a sand castle or some flat sand set up, and a wave came in and cut through it and then pulled back.
The wave came from the north, and it swept down over the landscape, basically carved, quarried, and gouged and gashed the landscape. And this is one of the places Graham and I went. If you look right in there, you'll see where it says Grand, part of Grand Coulee, Grand. Right there where the D is, we have a great video clip.
No, it's fucked. It's fucked. It's all fucked. My recording is fucked too. Why? No, it's fucked. It's fucked. It's all fucked. My recording is fucked too. Why?
Online with me and Ray, we're looking at this actual topo map right here, and it's surveying the cataract around us. You'll also notice that there's a rock blade, just like similar to the one that we just saw in the drone footage. See the rock blade, and you recognize the alcoves now? Yeah. And if we go to the next one, we have a Google Earth image of 1015 of this feature. And there's the Google Earth image, and for scale, in the upper left hand, I've superimposed Niagara Falls at the same scale, so you can see by comparison.
Wow.
Have you been to Niagara Falls, Joe?
I did. I went when I was a little kid, but I honestly don't remember. I
Okay.
think I went when I was a little kid. I'll have to check with my mom.
It's
honestly.
impressive to
Yeah.
see it. But the point here is that anybody looking at this, and if the folks look at the imagery on the online,
I think
Is
my
that one of the biggest
channel was
waterfalls
open
in
in
the
the
world?
other fucking. I think I
Niagara?
understand now.
not in terms of volume.
No, what is the
nor in
biggest?
terms of the
African
highest.
or something?
Yeah, or South American, maybe Victoria Falls. It depends, the highest or the greatest volume. It's about 200,000, between 150 and 200,000 cubic feet per second going over those falls, depending on the flow of the river. But the flow that came through here was about 350 million cubic feet per second and left this. And if you go online on the Geocosmic Rex website, there's a video clip of me and Graham down there just by Perch Lake.
May I ask
actually.
you a question here?
Yeah.
Now, if the water that was creating Grand Canyon, or the Niagara Falls, rather, right up there, if that all receded and we could see the bottom, wouldn't it look similar to what you're seeing here?
The what, of Grand Canyon?
No, excuse me.
Niagara
with
Falls.
Niagara Falls, right there, right above it, right there.
Yes, it would, but on a smaller scale.
On a smaller scale. But like on a smaller scale, like some of the smaller features that you see right there, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. You were saying earlier, it's fractal. The interesting thing about water erosion and sedimentation is it's scale invariant. So you can look at features, and coming up in the pictures here, I've got a beautiful example of scale invariance where you see the small version and the large version, and it's exactly the same thing. That's why if you go into any geology text, they've always got something in the photographs like a rock pick or a person standing there. Otherwise, it's hard to get a sense of the scale of what you're looking at, right?
So my question, though, was that if that's the case, if you could drain Niagara Falls and it would have a similar feature set to what you're seeing on the ground there, well, we know that Niagara Falls has been doing that for a long, long time.
12,000 years of work of the river at Niagara Falls.
Right.
Here you're looking at a moment in time that unfolded in a
Yo,
few
Eric.
Right, but how do we know that?
Yo,
Well, for one thing,
BE,
it's
what's
scale,
up, man?
because,
How are you, dude?
Because
Thanks,
in other
man.
words, how long would it take Niagara to carve something on
I
this
think we're
scale,
doing
if
Bunker
it's
One
taken
Secret
Niagara
Agent. Thanks,
10,000
buddy.
years,
How are you,
say,
man?
to carve that,
We're
how long would
doing.
it
This is
take
like a
the
setup
equivalent
stream.
flow
We
to
got a
carve this?
HDMI
But it will
capture
go
card,
Like if you drained it though.
USB capture card.
Well,
Thanks,
for
buddy.
one thing, it's not
Appreciate
salt
that, man.
bedrock, so you're not going to see quite the same type of erosion because really what you've
Jesus
got to
Christ,
consider is
technical
that all different
difficulties.
rock types erode different.
Right.
Also, what happens is you have regimes of flow. So that what you have in
Nice.
Niagara
Thanks, buddy.
today is a lower flow regime, which doesn't have anywhere near the type
Hopefully it
of
looks better.
turbulence or erosive potential is when you get water moving at
Should look
50 or
better.
60 miles an hour. One reason we definitely can know that this is the case is because we see the
Come on,
association
man,
with
like
the giant
why?
current ripples. We see the boulders that have been plucked and quarried, and some
Oh.
of them are 40, 50 feet in diameter. You see, and we'll look at
Tell me if there's interlacing issues.
coming
I
up
think
next
I put the
Do you have
de-interlacing
that
on,
image that you were talking
but I
about before,
also
that one
changed the
gigantic
source,
boulder that was
so I might
carried
have to
on?
put it on
Yes, it's
again. I don't
coming
know.
up.
Okay.
If we move quickly,
think it's okay.
We'll get to it. So
I should double check it
we'll
right
take-
now,
we'll do,
actually.
1017, and that'll be from the ground view, again with Niagara Falls superimposed for scale. The Horseshoe Falls, the Canadian Falls, superimposed for scale. Now, basically, that cataract at Horseshoe
Yeah, I
Falls
think it
is
looks
about
way better.
120 feet in height. The cliff wall of this giant cataract is about 400 feet high. And then you see the
I
big
noticed when I
blade rock
went
out there,
to it.
and the full extent of the
When I
thing
looked at-
actually
it
goes
looks okay.
all the
Thanks,
way
buddy.
to the horizon. But we can't see that beyond there. But this erosion goes all the way to the
And
horizon.
that
How you
cut
doing,
in
man?
stone.
That cut into basalt, hard columnar basalt.
Oh, I was so
That
bad.
was extruded basically with the eruption of the Yellowstone caldera, long 15 million years ago, basically. But then covered up by a couple of hundred feet of lost topsoil, and then that was exposed when the floods came through. Go to the next.
You okay? Doing well, man. Doing well, buddy. Thanks, man.
You'll see an example of some of the debris
Thanks, buddy.
that was left behind by the floodwaters when they finally ceased.
Oh, man.
There's the stuff that you're looking at. Now, the bigger stuff there is 30 and 40 feet. Those would be like 4-story buildings down there.
So those are just washed away by this gigantic river.
That's just this massive, gigantic river moving 50, 60 miles an hour, sweeps through there, plucks and tears the bedrock.
Yeah, I might
When
just
the
do like
spigots
level hopping.
finally
You know what I
get
want?
turned
I
off,
want to
the
do.
water starts subsiding, and this
like,
stuff that's being carried in there just gets left in the wake. Just like you're going to see any modern smaller flood is going to leave material in its wake. The difference is this material is piles of
Brutal.
boulders the size of houses, gravel bars 200 and 300 feet thick and 3 miles long, and they're all in it. So see, here's the answer to your question is, and this is how Brett's finally did it.
Eric,
was by showing that
it's
it
like
was
your
the full
birthday
suite
around
of
these
evidence
days, isn't it?
taken
Happy birthday,
integral
man.
that
I know it's
created a
around
picture that was
now.
undeniable to the skeptics. It was just, it was
Level hopping can be
overwhelming
healthy,
because
yeah.
it was every piece fit together.
I was doing, you know what I was doing? I was doing
and there was
S2
no other
SA. I was trying to get
explanation
this,
other than gigantic
the what's it
hydraulic
called
events.
shot.
And now it's a
Hey,
question
thanks, bro.
of
Yeah, man.
the detail. What caused
Sometime
it,
around
how
now,
long
the
did
other
it
day.
take,
Cool, man. Yeah, I don't want to
that's
dox
where
you.
the controversy is now.
This is amazing.
I should
It's
change it full
amazing and
screen, whatever.
terrifying, But what's cool about it is
Or
it's
not
terrifying,
full screen,
but
widescreen.
everything's okay right now.
Everything's okay right now.
Right now. So it's like you feel like, I'll be fine. But
I
maybe
have no
not.
idea what I'm doing
If
here.
something like this happens again.
Well, you have to ask what could be the change in in the human orientation to life
Oh,
on
that's
this
not good.
planet. Like, for example, I remember the first Earth Day, 1970, right? When this consciousness about, hey, you know what? Our existence on this planet is having
Oh,
an
that's
effect on
terrible.
this planet, right? And at that point, you see this whole environmental consciousness
Seems like I'm
emerge
terrible at
that
this game.
didn't exist before that, right? Well, I
Like,
think
there's
maybe
no
the
hope
next
for this
decade
one, I
we're gonna
don't
see a
think.
new environmental consciousness
But like Frigate 00,
that
maybe?
involves the recognition that this planet we live on is a very dynamic place and has been so, and is the key to deciphering a lot of mysteries, geological, cultural, historical, and paleontological,
Above the door.
biological, etc. That this has been a dominant
And above
factor in
the
the evolution
walkway.
of basically everything that's been going on this planet, whether you're looking at millions of years
Thanks,
or
man.
thousands of years.
Yeah, that'll
It's
take some
it's
time,
such
I think.
a strange time to be alive, where all this stuff is coming together. All this information is being.
You know what I want to do? I want to see
exposed.
Ace's route. Oh, that's also going to take some
a hidden
time.
archive has been broken open and the stuff is spilling out. And
I just want to see the pace.
whether you've opened Pandora's box by letting it out, but
and it's all logical.
We got Mr. 108 in
it's so
chat.
easy to follow. It's all. I mean, it seems like when it comes to like a step by step. 1029 coming up. 1029.
Yeah, no, that's not a thing.
Now this we're going to travel about 500
Never mind. I think that
miles
just
south
answered my
out into
question.
the Utah canyon
That's
lands.
beautiful.
And what you're seeing there is basically dry cataracts. Now that you've seen these cataracts, you can begin to recognize them all over the
We're pretty close to 23,
now, this has
man.
not been acknowledged as
I
being
think if I just honestly just
a
keep
cataract.
grinding.
But what you
That'd be
actually
pretty
see
epic
when you
time.
look at the modern erosion is that these features are being slowly eroded and eaten away by the modern erosion. And it's a different erosional regime altogether that creates features like this. And this is a vast scale of erosion.
Just
here.
above the door,
Travel
above the
over
walkway,
Southwest,
to the
that is
right
the
of the door.
striking thing that you're gonna
Yeah, I
experience if you're
I still don't understand,
empathic
so
with
I'm
the
not
landscape,
gonna
which is
try
that there's
to.
been this enormous amount of erosion. Now, I'm not
Fave
saying
difficulty
that
for
this enormous
Ignice.
amount of erosion was all
Alright,
created by
one sec.
flood. But I think what it is possibly saying is that when we go back over several million years, gigantic floods on this scale aren't that exception. That there's something that from time to time, and see, here's the thing, this is completely removed from the glaciers. Any water that would have eroded this landscape was not coming from the glaciers. It had to have been coming from rainfall. If you go to the next
Thanks,
slide,
buddy.
Jamie, 1000.
which is not a disconnected
No.
element because
Why?
because of the massive rainout that resulted from the impacts on the ice cap.
What's this?
This is Valles Calderas. This is the largest volcanic caldera in North America. It's 11 miles across, and here's what's in it. Was born out of a catastrophe millions of years ago, right? And then subsequent eruptions over hundreds of thousands of years have left this feature. But what's interesting to us here is what happened around 12,000 years ago. The entire caldera filled up suddenly. And if you look at if you look at it as a clock, at about 8 o'clock, you can see a breach, a valley coming off. You see that?
Yeah.
Jamie, can you? Yeah, right there. That was the spillover. So at the same time, now get this, at the same window of time that these flood events are happening up in Washington and Idaho.
I might have to change my timing too if I'm YOLOing it more.
This caldera suddenly fills up with water. And the water spills over the rim and cuts a canyon hundreds of feet deep. Now, what could cause that to suddenly fill up with water? And it's completely removed. It's not receiving glacial meltwater. There's only one thing by default, and that would be rainfall. A lot of rainfall, falling over days and days at a time.
Fucking terrible.
So if you go to the next slide, we'll see what sits down in the bottom of this valley is thousands of these gigantic rolled boulders. And you know that they're water transported because they're round, they're rolled. That's what water does. It rolls.
Yeah, this
these
level
things.
might take
Now,
some
this is in
time
New Mexico.
too.
See? So this is related to the spillway, the overflow of Valles Caldera, which has been dated to that same interval when the floods were happening up north. The same interval that now the comet is dating to. Is this coincidence or are the two related? I would say it would be very premature to dismiss it and say that they're not related.
You bet.
Because as Graham just said, one of the consequences of an impact, whether it's into the ocean or the ice sheet, is you're going to have extreme amounts of water vapor injected catastrophically into the atmosphere, which is then going to rain out in incredible torrential downpours that might last for days at a time. And along with that water vapor is a tremendous amount of particulate mass.
And it's that rainout that I would say caused the erosion on the Sphinx and tells us that the Sphinx is 12,000 years old, not
Exactly.
2,500 BC.
You guys are freaking me out. This is amazing. This is the most convincing argument yet that you guys have ever made for this. But it's all been convincing. But this is more compelling than all the pieces
Let's
that
go
come
to
together.
World's
Yeah.
worst figure
Go to
player.
the next slide, Jamie, which would be 1030.
Which
Which is
essay?
a
Which level?
beautiful
Bunker
example
1?
of Scale and variance. Here we have the modern Snake River flowing in
Dude,
the
my
modern
stick
channel.
My stick is
And
so
then we
done,
have
man.
The ancient flood channel.
Or my gears.
And
I
which
think
you
I
can
need
see
new
there,
gears.
the average annual discharge of the
This is my
snake.
10 out of 10 Aztec
56,900
stick.
cubic feet.
No, it's
But
like
the
a
estimated
4.
flood that created the big channel is 40 million.
Yeah.
cubic
Oh,
feet.
dude, it's fun.
And now this flood actually was coming up.
It's really
get
fun.
this,
With the
out of
new,
Utah.
dude, the new
It was
strat is
coming up, it was
amazing.
part of the giant
I
lake,
love the new strat.
Bonneville,
It
of
saves
which
at least
the
a
Great
second.
Salt Lake is but a diminutive remnant.
So the Bonneville Salt Flats.
And it's just,
Bonneville Salt
I like the
Flats
flow
was
better.
bottom of this gigantic lake that filled the basins of northeastern Utah. And at the end of the last ice age, it suddenly filled up very rapidly and spilled over a mountain pass to the north, and then flooded the Snake River Plain of southern Idaho. And anybody can see the Snake River
See like
Plain
that.
if you
See
go to
the
Google
down
Earth or
C.
any topographic map.
See how much faster it is?
Cut
This is
channels
23
like
pace.
this that ultimately led
But
to
it's
the
just so
flood of the river.
YOLO.
But interestingly, the dating of this puts it again.
And then you
right
miss
in
the
that
B
window.
press.
So
That window of 12,000
Like, that might not have been pace.
600 years ago when
Yes.
everything changes.
yes, everything changes. And so what I'm showing you is just a little bit selecting random almost dots to show you that no matter where you look, you're going to see evidence of these events imprinted into the landscape. Yeah, go to the next slide, 1033. And if you go down and you stand on that floodplain down there, you'll see the kind of stuff that got left behind. This is the sediment load.
It's very heartbreaking level.
So you got what kind of powerful currents are necessary to transport. And I'm standing in the canyon that was cut by the flood. Those walls are 400 feet high.
So what we would think of as being like little pebbles at the bottom of a stream
Yes.
that gets moved around.
Yes.
In
Like-
this grand scale.
This is like sand grains on the bottom of a modern little creek, but or
They all
river.
can be LOL, yeah.
Yes, and this is what a geologist or geomorphologist
Well
would
said.
call the bed load. The stuff being swept along in the floodwaters, being rolled and tumbled.
And
not even
geologists
pace.
recognize this, but they think it took, mainstream geologists think it took a
Like,
long
it's just
No,
so
I mean
shit.
the few geological papers that have been written on this admit that it was one big catastrophic flood.
Wow. And what is their explanation for that catastrophic flood?
Well, that somehow Lake Bonneville rose up and
Same thing, right.
breached a pass on its northern rim, but
Is that possible in any way?
well, yeah. If you have enough rainfall prolonged over a period of time, days or weeks, that the whole body of water could have raised by 300 feet roughly, and then it
But you would need something like the comet impact to provide you with a source for that rainfall.
right, because otherwise there's no other explanation for that kind of rainfall. And it's known from the modeling of oceanic impacts that yes, there would be unbelievable rain out in the aftermath of an oceanic impact. And clearly the same thing would follow in the wake of an ice impact.
What oceanic impacts do we have on
So
this?
my timing's all wrong.
There's one up by Sweden,
We were discussing also the possible Indian
Just
Ocean,
everything's wrong.
possibly one in the Indian
Creates-
Ocean.
5,000 years ago, which creates tsunamis on both sides of the Indian Ocean. Massive tsunami deposits. And again, this whole argument of the Younger Dryas cataclysm between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, the strongest case is the focus of the science has been on 12,800 years ago, but there's a lot of interest in the 11,600 years ago as well, and the strongest suggestion of what caused that sudden rise in temperatures accompanied by meltwater pulse 1b was a second encounter with more fragments of the debris of the comet, this time the impact not being on the North American ice cap but in a major ocean, probably the Pacific. And that then puts a huge plume of water vapor into the upper atmosphere and shrouds the Earth.
It's not pace anyways,
and
see.
creates the greenhouse effect.
That's what I did on my
accounts for the
24.
radical rise in
Just fucking
temperature that
shitty like
occurred
that.
11,600 years
It's
ago.
too much. Takes too
More
much
science
time.
needs to be done on that. It's another reason why I want to see the Comet Research Group funded, because this is important work.
God damn, this is an awesome podcast. This might be my all-time favorite.
Okay, we'll
We've
look
had
at
some
about
fun.
half a dozen.
Yeah, for sure. Let's roll.
Okay, 1,000.
That's way too early.
And this is here now. You'll be able to see actually a person
See, it's just so
in
fucking
the
random.
field of view next to a giant current ripple, and that's a giant current ripple field. We did see this one, Graham. This
Yeah.
is the West Bar.
Very cool.
Yes, if you go back one slide, we can see an aerial photo I took years ago of West Bar. It's 3 miles long. There it is. And there's an airport down. The lighter colored buff stuff is a landing strip. And the airport building there is 3 stories tall. So this whole feature is 3 miles long. And the ripples here are on the same scale as the Camas Prairie ripples that we just looked at. Of course, this is
28. Oh my God, I'm so bad.
So again, as we begin to place these,
I thought that was like 24
around on the map, we can begin to see the outlines of a really, really huge event. And all of this is going on at the same time. You've got to understand.
All this is dated to the same time. All this is dated to the same time that you think the impact took place, and it's all over that coast.
The only dates that we have that are hard dates are of volcanic ash, primarily, from Mount St. Helens, that date at 13,000 years. But they use that as a baseline and then assume that there was multiple floods, and each flood was separated by 50 to 100 years. And what they've done is they've gone from Brett's original model of a single flood into a dozen floods, into 40 floods, and now up to 80 or 90 floods, which I disagree with. But on the other hand, there were, see, I think you have to understand this in 2 phases, because the impact phase is going to melt a whole lot of ice all of a sudden, but it's not going to melt all of it. It's going to leave a huge amount of residual ice in the aftermath. Now, what we see is that particularly after the 11,600 year ago event, at that point, the whole planet comes right out of the Ice Age, inexplicably.
That's the end of the Ice Age.
That's the end of the Ice Age, the beginning of the Holocene. It's over. And basically, what we're seeing there is that there is a great deal of heat suddenly that's brought the planet out of the Ice Age. It does not revert
see
back
down
into the
there.
Ice Age like it did at the 12,900 event. See? So what we then have is that in the aftermath of this event, the whole climate of the Earth has been completely altered. The whole balance of nature has been completely altered from before these events to after these events. But what you have now is a lot of residual ice that takes about 2,000 or 3,000 years to melt away.
So sea levels continue to rise.
Sea levels continue to rise, and the melting of this ice produces some pretty big floods, but not on the scale of what we're looking at here. And I think it's my personal opinion that there's a confusion between the 2 different flood regimes. And I'm
It's
going
too slow anyways.
I'm writing all this up in detail as a thesis.
Oh, we're too lucid. I think we need to load the vape.
My interpretation of the phenomenon over 20 years. But let's go to.
That would be so important. I would love to see people.
So are you back home now, Eric?
Really go over this with a fine-tooth comb.
Have you been back home for a while?
It's just so amazing. Like just this.
How was Oklahoma, man? You can learn.
Wow. What kind of power and force would it take to create those ripples, those 50-foot-high ripples all over the place, miles and miles and miles of them?
Yeah, and you see nothing since that event.
I don't know why I
really
hesitated.
effective. They're still sitting there, these gigantic, monstrous fossil features in the landscape.
Now, when they do core samples on that stuff, what do they find out? Like as far as the dating of it, like if they get to the bottom of one of those ripples.
Well, you've got to be able to find organic material in there. And to the extent that there's organic material, it basically all dates from the end of the Ice Age. The problem is when you have a flood like this coming through, it's sweeping up everything in its path, including forests and animals. So if you've got a bone in there or a piece of wood, that doesn't necessarily mean when the flood happened.
Right.
It's not a nice layer of layers of sediment. It's a jumbled, messed up
chaotic mess.
And it's not like you could just go dig into the side of that hill at that same level and find something that's organic and absolutely dated to that, because that's all stone.
Right. It's boulders. It's if you saw a cross section of one of those ripples, it's just a jumbled, chaotic mess of everything, from finest sand and silt up to boulders the size of cars and even houses and stuff.
That's so crazy.
Go to 1041 and we'll see an interesting artist rendition by Edward Liao, who did all the illustrations for the original Jules Verne books, and he did a version for an geology.
Because there's the 2 bullets. You see how I took 2 bullets on that second cam? It's too slow. Just lose the cycle.
Image because it basically shows an event on the scale of what we're talking about. And what's interesting here is you see that the torrents are carrying icebergs, and in this one iceberg.
No.
I call it.
Well, that was just so fast, man. For me.
I have sufficient
Because it's carrying a gigantic
Yeah, when
boulder.
Brad and I we're talking about it, it's Graham.
Yeah, because I went and climbed that
It's
one.
no
yeah.
longer the Wenatchee erratic.
Right.
It's the Graham erratic.
Oh, I'm honored, Ryan. Thank you.
Okay, so we got the Graham erratic coming up in about 3 images. So let's go to the next one, 1042. And this is basically another key piece of evidence. It's strewn for thousands of square miles throughout the path of the flood. You have these gigantic boulders. And these are being carried aboard icebergs.
So let me describe what we're looking at right now, because there's a person. Is that you there?
I took the picture, so it's 2 of my fellow travelers.
Okay, normal-sized people, and whatever, 6 feet tall, and bounce them on top of each other. 12, 18. You're looking at probably at least 35, 40 feet tall, right?
Yeah.
And wider than it is tall.
Oh yeah, 60 feet wide.
That's insane. And that was carried by water.
It was carried on icebergs in the water.
Oh my God!
So this flood is not just water. It's huge, thousands of icebergs. It's forest strips up by their roots. It's a jumbling mass of powerful erosive flow.
Amazing.
Thousands of megafauna are done down. In fact, there have been a lot of mammoth remains found in Missoula flood sediments, particularly in the Willamette Valley. Okay, let's go to the next image. There we go. This is like out in the middle of the prairie. You got thousands.
Come on, like shoot the camera.
I'm a chicken. I wouldn't stand right there. I don't think that thing's gonna roll on top of you. That would be a wrap, son.
Yeah. This is known as Jaeger rock.
That thing's huge. And is that you underneath there?
No, that's one of my. I took the pictures.
Did you tell him to stand there?
Yeah, I said stand there, and then I had the other guys go around the back rock at the.
And push on it. This thing is kind of hanging off the side of that hill the way some of those Hollywood Hills houses are. The ones that are on stilts.
See that rounded mass of stuff that it's sitting in is called a berg mound. And you see these icebergs are not clean ice. They're dirty. They're filled with gravel and debris. So when a berg that's being carried in the flood and the flood waters subside, the bergs get stranded in the land. They then melt. And if there's no boulder, there's just a mound. If there's no gigantic boulder, there's just a mound. But if there is
looks like a ball of turd
boulder being carried aboard the iceberg, it will be sitting in a berg mound like you see right here.
That's amazing. So that white line that we see is where the iceberg was when it deposited that thing, then it just melted from there?
No.
I don't know if it's pace.
Plane between 2 different kinds of basalt.
Okay. So the mound itself below it is what you're saying is the berg mound?
That's the berg mound.
Oh, okay.
And the boulder, the big boulder, was the cargo sitting on top of the iceberg.
Okay. So the berg is not just water; it's water with a bunch of dirt and all kinds of other shit in it as well.
Yeah.
And so when it melts, that's what it leaves behind.
That's what it leaves behind.
I see. That's amazing.
Okay. In the next image, we have the Hancock erratic.
Is that you up there?
Well, that's me on top of that 18,000-ton boulder.
Weren't you breaking the law?
Yeah, I was. I do that from time to time. But it's an amazing experience to stand there and to think what transported this. Well, we know it was transported in an iceberg, and it was dumped there on the side of that valley. And it's just the thought of thousands of these things plowing along at 60 or 70 miles an hour, carried on a gigantic flood. How do we have anything left, No wonder. No wonder we've forgotten our past.
And here's the thing. I mean, what we're doing here is we're looking where these flood events are preserved the most spectacularly. And the reason is because you had a very steep gradient from the ice sheet elevation to the Pacific Ocean. But like Graham and I, when we traveled across the Continental Divide and traveled from the Rocky Mountains to the Twin Cities, which is on the Mississippi River. And all the way across, we were crossing huge meltwater coulees. We crossed the Missouri River Valley, which is an underfit stream, just very similar to the Snake, where the modern Missouri is just a little ribbon of river occupying this massive meltwater channel, of which there are hundreds across the plains. And then when we got to Minneapolis, we went up and we visited some of the largest known potholes.
Amazing potholes, which, again, you're looking on the scale of giants. This is beyond imagination what we look at, and the flood explanation makes sense of it.
Go to 1054, Jamie, and you'll see. There we go. I'm down inside the pothole, one of the potholes, looking up at Graham.
So that's a pothole carved into stone by whirlpools.
I did.
Yeah. which has got rocks in them, and the rocks are the erosive agent that's cutting out the pothole.
Just think like a massive hydraulic drill. Just picking up, coarse rock and then just drilling, literally drilling holes 50, 60, 80 feet deep.
Again,
into
folks,
the rock.
go to the YouTube. Please, if you're listening.
What the fuck was that?
Just go.
What the
You
fuck's
gotta fast
that?
forward to this. This is insane. This image is insane. Just thinking of watching.
I tried some no
rocks
body
spin
armor
around,
runs earlier.
drilling into the ground, and you're talking about
Did
over
not
a
do
short
very
period of
well.
time.
Oh, yeah. Probably, I'm
Just
guessing,
get lit up
these
right
giant
away.
meltwater floods. This is right along the St. Croix River, which forms the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin. It was probably of several weeks' duration at its peak. And so the drilling of these bedrock probably was accomplished within that time span.
What I wouldn't give to know what that was like, just to see it.
Well, you'd have had to be in orbit to survive.
Right? Yeah, even if you're flying over in a plane, probably just the atmospheric change.
Listen, on top of these flood sediments I've documented it from Ohio to Washington State, there are thick layers of loess. Now, loess is this strange topsoil that came down, and they've been arguing for generations. Is it wind deposited or water deposited? But the curious thing is it seems to be both wind and water deposited. But I think the obvious explanation for it is that when you see the top layers of the flood sediments, particularly in the back flood regions where the water was calmer rather than so torrential, you see these layers, these beautiful, they're called rhythmites. They're very rhythmical. On top of that is a layer of this loess topsoil with this vertical structure, right? Well, to me, and again, without getting into the technical background, I think the logical explanation and most likely explanation is that at the tail end of the final flood flows, what you're seeing is a rainfall of mud. And this rainfall of mud came down in effect.
Which many ancient traditions speak of.
Yes.
Black bituminous rain, mud falling from the sky, darkness, a time of darkness. It's all described in the myth. Myths are the memory banks of humanity. We should not call them myths, we should call them memories.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this muddy rainfall perfectly fits the whole narrative. And again, with the mythology, it's right there.
When we think of these, the idea of these tsunamis, we think of water that you can see. But we're most likely dealing with the entire air around you filled with torrential downpour and solid matter. And everything's flying through the air.
Slurry.
Incredible winds.
Incredible winds, yes.
So it's both wind and water and just full-on chaos, super hurricanes.
It's nature gone chaotic and crazy on ultimate steroids.
This is
what it is.
So wild.
And it's real. That's the thing.
And it happened while people were alive.
Oh yeah, it happened while people were alive.
Absolutely.
This is not some dinosaur thing.
No, it happened a blink of an eye ago. It happened when anatomically modern humans had already been around for 200,000 years.
Writing.
Well, no, but not according to the Orthodox historians. Right. But if we're dealing with a lost civilization, which I believe to be the case, then yes.
It totally makes sense. Completely, totally makes sense.
Yeah, and it's time to get to grips with this. It's time to move forward to the next level and start recovering our memory.
And also start recognizing this is a potential reality.
Yeah.
This is not just the past. This is also
the future.
Very possible.
Yeah. And again, if I may say so, crowdfunding. It's the opportunity for the people to give their voice. Can you show that page? This is the crowdfunding page for the Comet Research Group. And it's on...
And the link is on grahamhancock.com.
There it is. So if you go to grahamhancock.com and click on the Comet Research Group banner, then you'll get taken immediately to the crowdfunding page. Please support it. Whatever you can give, it'll make all the difference. It sends a message that we care about alternative heretical research. And also, while you're at my website, I put up there a lot of other follow-ups to this podcast. If people want to go places I'm talking in America in the next weeks,
yes,
and links and connections, a lot of stuff related to this podcast.
Yes.
I'd like to plug my DVD that has a lot of these images on it.
Okay.
And it's about 5 hours of stuff, Blu-ray. And if they go to the website Sacred Geometry International,
do you have that available as a download?
It's going to be if it's not already. Yeah, I think it is available for a download. Yeah.
My laptop doesn't even. I don't know. Nobody's does anymore.
The answer is yes. If it's not now, it will be. I think it is actually now available for download.
It's got to get it on iTunes or Amazon or something.
Yeah, and it's hours of stuff, but I get into a lot of other stuff. Some of the interesting sidelines, the archaeoastronomy and the sacred geometry and so forth that might be associated with ancient cultures.
And what's the name of this again?
Cosmic Patterns and Cycles of Catastrophe. And there it is. There it is. Yeah, that's the older version. This is the newer, upgraded version.
All right.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Beautiful. And there's the Blu-ray.
Yeah, there's the Blu-ray. Yep.
Okay, so an HD download. Excellent.
There it is. Yeah.
Gentlemen, this has been a long podcast of awesomeness. Man, this cemented in my head. I mean, the idea was already cemented in my head, but these images, along with your compelling narrative, is cemented even further. This is amazing. Such a cool podcast. And managed to entertain and scare the shit out of me at the same time. So thank you for that. Graham, it's Graham.
Oh, we're gonna add the Terrence
McKenna
as the AI bot.
Yeah, they made it really difficult to reach me on Twitter, but it is there. And then I've got my Facebook page, and my website is the main portal, grahamhancock.com. Everything comes off there. My book.
We're gonna do that. We're gonna load the vape.
Are you verified on Twitter so they know which one to follow?
I'm verified on Facebook, but they haven't verified me on Twitter.
How dare you?
I'm
Twitter.
over. I got 100,000 followers there, but they haven't verified me.
And,
but I'm me. I am me. Yeah.
Randall, how much do you pay attention to social media? At all? You have your guide dude
from
most
time
of it,
to
right?
time I'll immerse myself into it for a few days or as much as I can take, and then I gotta back off for a while.
Well, you're gonna get a flood of questions about this one because this was awesome. I mean, really, thank you so much. I'm so thankful and honored to know you guys because to me this is the ultimate thing for me on this podcast is to be able to have people on that are talking about things that I find absolutely captivating. And you guys, I think what you're doing is so important.
You're playing a huge role, Joe, in opening people's minds to unthinkable thoughts all around the world, stuff that people have been told they are not allowed to think about.
Man. Come on.
Your show is opening doors that have never been opened before. So.
Stumbled into it. I don't know how it happened.
I would like to get you out in the field, Joe.
I would like to get out in the field,
I would like
too.
to get you out in the field because
I want to see that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm
I want to go to
about.
Washington State. Let's do it. Let's set something up. We'll make a video. I want to go there. I want to see that.
Let's do it.
That looks crazy.
I'm serious. This is...
Young Jamie, you in? Jamie's in. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Jamie. See you soon. Here we go. And boom, we're live. Graham, great to see you again.
Nice to be back with you, Joe.
And we were just talking about your new book, America Before, that there's two versions of it. There's one version, and then there's a newer version that's a Barnes & Noble version that's specific to Barnes & Noble that has an extra whole chapter in it.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and so they can get that at Barnes & Noble. I'm just trying to keep bookstores alive, man. They're on the way out.
I think it's really important, and that's one of the reasons that I did this, because I had finished the book, and then Barnes & Noble came to me through my publishers and said they would like to do a special edition of the book, but in order to do that, I needed to write them some extra material. And I had a lot of material that I hadn't put in the book, and I thought, well, this is an opportunity to put that out there.
Beautiful. So if people want that, it's a little bit different, and there's a small gold square.
Okay, so first of all, my website, grahamhancock.com, has a page about America Before, and the link to the Barnes & Noble edition is there, as well as the link to the standard edition, which is on Amazon and iTunes and all kinds of other places. So grahamhancock.com and the America Before page, the link to the Barnes & Noble edition is right there.
All right, there it is. So how is this, before we even get into the book, what is it?
Go to Talks and Events.
Okay, we're on the Graham Hancock website.
No, go to books. Go to books. Go to America Before.
Bam.
Bam.
There it is.
Go to United States. You can see Amazon, Barnes, and there's Barnes & Noble.
Special edition.
Special edition. Click on that.
There you go. And then the ebook as well.
The ebook is available. The audio book, which I read myself, is available there. And then if you scroll down, Oops, that shouldn't be there.
It's damn pop-ups.
Damn
Sons of
pop-ups.
bitches. I am so happy you read it yourself. I get angry when someone else reads someone who I'm like, come on, he can talk.
Yeah, I enjoy reading my books myself, and what I've learned from feedback I get from audiences at presentations is people like me doing that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's just weird when someone else is talking in your voice. Like, hey man, I know you're not calm.
You know that I write fiction as well as non-fiction.
Yeah.
And the one thing I can't read is my fiction.
Really?
Because fiction requires accents. You really need an actor
Yes.
to read a fiction book who can get into the different characters. But for a non-fiction book like America Before, it's very straightforward for me just to read it myself.
I agree. I'm a tremendous Stephen King fan, but when I read Stephen King's books where he reads them or listen to them when he reads them, they're terrible. He's awful at it.
I don't think a novelist should read their own novels. I think that's a job for an actor. Oddly enough, I've just been reading Stephen King's Dark Tower series. Very near the end of the 7th volume of that.
Yeah, I'm just a giant fan of his, but
Me
man,
too.
when he reads it like he's just reading it.
Yeah.
It's like, oof, this is rough. It's hard to get behind. Anyway, America Before.
So there's
Give us
on the website. There's details about the book. There's a page where there are links to the book, and also the other thing I would like to take this opportunity to mention is I'm in America and Canada for the next 7 weeks, and I'm going to be doing something like 25 presentations in something like 20 American cities, and then 3 Canadian cities in Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. And that's all on the talks and events page of my website. So if anybody wants to come along and meet this old man in person, I will be doing those events.
And are you doing these at theaters, and do you allow Q&As? Like how does this work?
Absolutely, I allow Q&As. I encourage that. I feel as an author that, frankly speaking, I'm nothing without my audience. I owe my audience, my readers, big time. And what I try to do at events is to give back as much as I can. So if people want to take pictures with me, I am absolutely up for that. I don't understand why anybody would want to do that, but it's fun. It's kind of fun. And when people want to come to the desk where I'm signing and ask me personal questions, I'm ready to do that. Sometimes on the British book tour, which I just finished, I was behind in the event space for 4 hours after the event finished.
Wow.
Signing and taking pictures. But it's a joy. It's a really opportunity for me to interact with the people who actually make my work matter. So
That's fantastic. Beautiful. So what inspired this? I know there's always been, well, you, first of all, we should just say, for people who don't know, you have been at the front of the line for decades, talking about these lost civilizations. And from reading your work, I mean, I think I first read your work in the 90s. You exposed me to a lot of these, what were at the time controversial ideas that have now been substantiated by actual evidence, particularly Göbekli Tepe, and I mean the all the water erosion stuff on the Sphinx, and I've since had Dr. Robert Schock on the podcast to talk about that as well. But all this stuff was at one point very controversial, and now far less.
Yes.
I mean, whatever traditional academics and traditional historians that are trying to, I guess as archaeologists, that were trying to resist, they've let go a lot of that. They've had to with things like Göbekli Tepe.
They've had to because the evidence has overwhelmed them. And Göbekli Tepe is an excellent example. Prior to the discovery and excavation of Göbekli Tepe, which is a site in Anatolia in Turkey, it was the very firm view of archaeologists that there had been no megalithic architecture anywhere on Earth. And when I say megalithic, I mean literally big stones, stone circles, huge constructions, nothing like that before at the very, very earliest 6,000 years ago. And they would point to sites in, for example, Malta, a site called Gigantia, which is about 5,800 years old. That's the oldest megalithic architecture in the world. And they could understand how that was because these were agricultural societies. They generated surpluses. You could free up people who could become specialists in architecture, in astronomy, in geometry, and they could apply their skills to the construction of these sites. But what they never considered possible was that a society that was hunter-gatherers would have created a gigantic megalithic site. And then suddenly, Göbekli Tepe is discovered. It dates to 11,600 years ago. It's more than 5,000 years older than the supposedly oldest megalithic architecture in the world. And it is in a center where there had been no previous evidence of agriculture. But the moment Göbekli Tepe appears, agriculture appears as well. And this is just something that's really hard for archaeology to explain. They've suddenly got 5,000 years of missing history that they've just never taken into account. And what I see them doing is largely avoiding the problem, rather than getting getting to grips with it directly. And in fact, there have been a great number of changes in the last 20 years, which have worked generally in favor of the arguments that I've proposed.
Well, I'm so happy for you because I know that for a long time you were out there on your own with a lot of these theories.
Very much so, and also subjected to the most blistering and deeply unpleasant criticism from the archaeological fraternity and from their friends in the media, like how dare this journalist propose that history might be different, or that we might have a forgotten chapter in the human story. It was regarded almost as offensive that I would put this material out there, and archaeologists felt it was their responsibility to show the public that I was full of shit, and that was the whole way my work was greeted, and to a certain extent still is greeted by archaeologists. But things have changed. Central to my work was the notion of a global cataclysm, roughly 12,500, 12,800 years ago. It made sense to me in 1995 when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, but there was no compelling evidence for a global cataclysm then. All the evidence seemed to point to that time and a massive global event. And then from 2007 onwards, more than a decade after I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, we get a group of more than 60 major scientists who are seriously proposing that the Earth was hit by multiple fragments of a giant comet 12,800 years ago, and that this caused a huge rise in sea level and extinctions of megafaunas. They are not saying that it also wiped out a lost advanced civilization of prehistory. I'm saying that.
Yes.
But what has changed is that we now have compelling, hard scientific evidence. I'm not saying every scientist accepts it. It's the nature of science to dispute findings. But we have a group of 60 major figures who have seriously proposed this in all the leading mainstream journals. And it's changed the balance of power in this argument, because one thing that they used to say is Hancock can't be right because there was no global cataclysm 12 or 13,000 years ago. Well, now we know there was, and there are various explanations for it, so that's moved things along. And the other thing that's changed a lot is the attitude of the man in the street to authority. That has changed. Back in the 90s, authority figures were the gatekeepers. They controlled everything. If an authority figure in a discipline like archaeology said Hancock is completely wrong, he's made all this stuff up, that would generally be believed, not by everybody, but by the majority of people. Today, to have a mainstream authority figure say that to me is actually an advantage, because people are so distrustful of authority, and rightly so, because we've been lied to by authority figures in all fields for so long. The bullshit has been so enormous that people are finally waking up. We can't trust what authority figures say. And
I think we can thank the internet for that.
We can thank the internet for that, yeah.
I'm sure you've seen the more recent evidence of a crater that they just discovered, like fairly recently.
Greenland.
Yes,
yeah.
Enormous
It's an enormous crater. It's 18 miles wide. It had not been discovered before because it's under ice. It's under a lot of ice. At the end of the Ice Age, Greenland was one area which never lost its ice cover completely, whereas North America, everywhere north of Minnesota, was covered in ice a mile, sometimes 2 miles deep. Europe, the same, Northern Europe. But Greenland kept its ice, whereas the other parts of the world lost their ice at the end of the Ice Age. And what's interesting about Greenland is there's already evidence of comet impact in Greenland, which goes back to papers published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2013, that they found what are called impact proxies in Greenland. In other words, nanodiamonds, carbon spherules, and evidence of a lot of platinum and iron was found in a layer in the ice dated to 12,800 years ago. But the next development, that you're absolutely right, and this was just a few months ago, was the discovery of this humongous crater in Greenland, and evidence that it was caused by an iron impactor of some kind. Now, dating of it, I would be irresponsible to say that crater definitely dates to 12,800 years ago, because the work has not been done to prove that yet. But what I can say, and what the specialists who have explored and excavated the crater are saying, is that it's recent. They can say for sure that it happened during the last ice age. Under the crater, is nothing but massively disturbed and destroyed and completely wrecked ice from the ice age, from the Pleistocene. Above it is smooth, perfect ice from our epoch.
I don't think it was case anyways.
Which began about 11,600 years ago. So all the evidence suggests that this crater dates to that period between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. But to absolutely confirm that, more work needs to be done. But it's part of a growing pattern. The Younger Dryas impact scientists, they call themselves, they call this the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And it's because there was a period in the Earth's geological history that geologists call the Younger Dryas, which lasted for 1,200 years, from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. It's a very mysterious period. We see all the megafauna dying off suddenly and rapidly. We see rises in sea level. We see a huge collapse in global temperature. It's a cataclysmic epoch. And what is becoming clearer and clearer is that the evidence that a comet was behind it is extremely strong. And as more and more evidence comes in, we realize how widespread it was. So they found evidence of the impacts as far south as Antarctica now. Previously they were focused very much on North America. Now as far south as Antarctica, as far east as Syria. This was truly a global event, and it changed the world. And I think, and it's my case, that it wiped our memory of a previous episode of human civilization, that right at the epicenter of this cataclysm was a civilization that we would regard as advanced, not a simple hunter-gatherer civilization, which was utterly wiped out in this cataclysm.
And I should say, for anyone who's really fascinated right now, please maybe pause and go listen to the two that you did with Randall Carlson,
yes,
where it really goes into depth about the impact, the evidence of these impacts, yes, the evidence of the very quick demise of the Ice Age, and what may have resulted in all these floods that you read about in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you read about in Noah's Ark, and that all these things are probably tales of stories that people pass down from generation to generation that survived this time.
Yeah, because we now know that at that time, between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, truly global cataclysmic events involving rapid rises in sea level did occur, and suddenly the worldwide tradition of a global flood stops being just a myth and starts being a memory, an account of real events. It's been my privilege to work very closely with Randall Carlson.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Randall is absolutely amazing. He is a total genius. He's also a gentle giant and such a kind, generous, spirited person. It's a joy to work with him, and every minute spent with him is an education. I had the privilege of traveling across the Channel Scablands in Washington State with Randall, and seeing things through his eyes really opened my eyes to the scale of this disaster. You know, you could look at these giant boulders called glacial erratics, and they just look odd sitting there in the landscape. But when you really consider how they got there, that they got there in icebergs the size of oil tankers, that were carried on floods that were at least 500 up to 1,000 feet deep, that were tearing through the channeled scablands, literally ripping the landscape apart. Then the icebergs would ground on valley sides, the flood waters would recede, the icebergs would be left, they're giant icebergs. And as they melted away, they revealed the rocks that they had enchained that were caught up within them, and they're scattered all over the landscape. And you look at that and you think, anything that was underneath that 12,800 years ago is gone completely. There can't be anything left of it at all. Utterly, utterly destroyed.
And I would encourage people that are interested in this to please watch the YouTube videos of it, because Randall provides all sorts of video and photographic evidence where you can take a look at the landscape and you get a perspective of how immense this destruction was.
Yeah. It's really important to see that, because it's easy enough to talk about floods and cataclysms, but actually to see its effect on the landscape directly it has an emotional impact. I felt emotional traveling across the Channel Scablands, realizing that this was the heart of an event that changed the world completely. And the evidence continues to build. I have, in America before, I've not gone over old ground that I went over in Magicians of the Gods that we covered in the various interviews and podcasts, in which it's really a good idea that people take a look at. But what I have done is added the new information published since 2015, which further supports the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and the notion that multiple fragments of a giant comet hit the Earth and created an absolute global catastrophe.
So what was the motivation behind creating this book, America Before?
It's a curious mixture of things. I have been exploring the possibility of a lost civilization for more than 25 years. That was the essence of my book, Fingerprints of the Gods, that was published in 1995, that there has been a huge forgotten episode in human history. I continued to follow that in a series of other books, and by the time I got to 2002, when I published a book called Underworld, that followed 7 years of scuba diving on continental shelves, looking for structures that were submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, I really felt I'd done it. I felt I'd walked the walk. I'd put out to the public a massive body of information, and I thought my role in this is over, and I can breathe a sigh of relief because it's hot in this particular kitchen, and I can go do something else. And I ended up writing a book about psychedelics. I ended up writing Supernatural, Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind, about the role of psychedelics in the origins of the human story. But then new information started to come out that touched on the lost civilization idea, and I couldn't just stand by and ignore that information. That's why I published Magicians of the Gods in 2015. And then, as I was researching that book, I became aware of something I hadn't realized before, that there's a mass of new information from the Americas, specifically from the Americas, which completely rewrites the story of human history, that the Americas have been misrepresented for a very long time by archaeology. And archaeologists will be annoyed with me for saying that. They have a way of forgetting their own errors, of saying, oh, well, we knew that all along. It wasn't the case. But the fact of the matter remains that for the best part of 50 years, from the 1960s through until about 2010, American archaeology was locked in a dogma that they actually had a name for, which was Clovis first. That they invented a name for a culture. They called them the Clovis culture. We don't know what they called themselves. They were hunter-gatherers. They first appear in the archaeological record 13,400 years ago, and they vanish from the archaeological record 12,600 years ago. And for a very long time, it was maintained adamantly that these were the first Americans, that no human being touched the soil of the Americas until 13,400 years ago. Just animals, but no human beings present at all. And any archaeologist who attempted to dispute that dogma, and I use the word deliberately, there should be no room for dogma in science, but any archaeologist who challenged that would face severe problems with his or her career. They would be mocked and humiliated at conferences, like an archaeologist called Gyges from Canada, who excavated in the Yukon. Humiliated at conferences, insulted, accused of making stuff up. Their research funding would be withdrawn. Basically, to challenge Clovis first was the end of your archaeological career. So naturally, very few archaeologists wanted to challenge Clovis first.
What was this gentleman in the Yukon? What was his
He's called Gyges Cinq-Mars. And interestingly, the Smithsonian, just in 2017, did a big kind of mea culpa, a big admission about this, that everybody had got things wrong, that Gyges Cinq-Mars had been ruined by the Clovis first lobby, but he'd been right all along. The site he excavated in the Yukon was re-excavated in 2017, and every single thing he said was correct, even though they had just sneered at him.
In what year was he?
He was excavating in the 1980s and the 1990s.
Is he still alive?
He's still alive. He's still alive. Yeah.
Is he better?
Well, I think he's vindicated, you know, and it's kind of nice to be vindicated.
Yes.
That there's almost a place in folklore for the individual who is scorned and humiliated, you know, by others, but who turns out to be right, and he was right. But my point about this is that what it meant was, since it was the dogma that Clovis was first, that the oldest dates were 13,400 years ago, there seemed to be no logic to archaeologists in digging deeper. You know how it is with archaeology, that the upper levels are the youngest, and the deeper you go, the older it gets. That's why we say Upper Paleolithic for the late Ice Age, and Lower Paleolithic for the late Stone Age, and lower for the older Stone Age. And the feeling was, no need to dig below the Clovis layer, because we already know that there were no human beings there before that. And then a few archaeologists, I've mentioned Gyges Cinq-Mars, but another is Al Goodyear from the University of South Carolina, who excavated a site called Topper in South Carolina. Now, Topper is an incredibly rich Clovis site. It's full of their tools, their points. They made these special flint points that were used as arrowheads and spears. A great Clovis site. He finished excavating the Clovis level, and then he did something that was supposed not to be done. He decided to dig deeper, and he carried on digging down, and there was a layer of about 1.5 meters of barren soil, and then beneath that, more human artifacts. And they finally date those back to more than 50,000 years ago. And then in 2017, published in Nature by Tom Demaray, who's the chief paleontologist at the San Diego Natural History Museum, and a bunch of other very high-level paleontologists, published in Nature magazine, evidence for human presence in North America 130,000 years ago. Now, this has really put the cat amongst the pigeons. Now, if humans were present in North America 130,000 years ago, and archaeologists have been telling us for 50 years that they were only present from 13,000 years ago, that's 10 times as long that we've had humans in North America capable of doing stuff.
Practice the actual
has prevented any search for what they were doing until very recently.
What was the evidence from 130,000 years ago?
Okay, so it's not the, let me be clear about this, because this is something that is often misrepresented in my views. It is not the evidence for an advanced civilization that we find 130,000 years ago in America. The evidence that we find is evidence for human presence. And what they were doing was very much Stone Age stuff. It's a mastodon. It's a mastodon skeleton that was excavated. It was actually found by accident during road construction near San Diego. And an archaeologist was attached to the road construction crew and immediately stopped construction, and they investigated it thoroughly. And what they found was so much dynamite in the early 1990s when they found it that they decided not to publish at the time. Because what they found was evidence that those mastodon bones had been cracked open by human beings using tools, and that the marrow had been extracted, that one tusk had been left standing upright in the ground and another had been left beside it, that a femur of the animal had been taken away completely from the site. And there was assemblages of instruments that were used to smash and break the bones. And the conclusion of the team was that only one kind of creature could have done that work using tools on a mastodon, and that's human beings. That's classic human behavior. So this sets the goalposts in a totally different place. Suddenly we have to consider that humans have been in America for 130,000 years. We already know that a dogmatic approach of archaeology has rather refused to look at anything older than 13,000 years ago. And what it does is it generates an engine of demand that we need to be looking at those missing 100,000 plus years. We need to be looking at it hard. Of course, the immediate reaction has not been to go looking for stuff in the other 100,000 years. Most archaeologists have responded by saying this is impossible. It can't be so. But that's precisely what they said to Jacques Cinq-Mars, who said that humans were in Bluefish Caves in the Yukon 25,000 years ago. And it's precisely what they said to Al Goodyear, who said humans had been at Topper 50,000 years ago. And they were both right. And I believe that Tom Demaray and his team, you don't get a big article published in Nature unless it's already pretty solidly based and pretty much peer reviews. It has produced a reaction. I would be wrong to say that it's universally accepted. It's very much challenged, but it's intriguing.
What is the challenge?
The challenge fundamentally comes from we archaeologists know that there were no human beings in the Americas that far back. To put it in perspective, it's about 60,000 years before the first evidence of human beings in Europe. It's about 60,000 years before the first evidence of human beings in Australia.
And this is just evidence of the first human beings.
Yes.
We have to point out how difficult it is to find evidence.
It's extremely difficult to find. You know, sometimes we imagine that archaeologists are working with masses of skeletal material. No, they're not. They're not. I mean, this is one of the ironies. The whole Clovis first dogma, you would think that they had masses of material to work with. They did have the tools, but in terms of skeletal remains, just one. Just one single skeletal remain from that period.
One of the things that Michael Shermer had sent me was this dispute that perhaps the bones had been cracked open by the excavation material.
Yeah,
by the excavation machines.
I saw Michael's email last night, and I appreciate that Michael wants to continue to engage with this subject, and that's his job. He's a professional skeptic, and it's his role to do so. But what he misses out, it's true that a new paper has been published, which raises questions over the what's called the Cerruti Mastodon site, which is the site that Tom Demaray at San Diego Natural History Museum excavated. And what's interesting, since Michael took the trouble to write the questions, can I just read you something that I responded to on this.
Sure.
Which is that...
Just do it into the microphone.
Yeah. Basically, this paper was in no way a refutation of the original paper in Nature. As a matter of fact, the gentleman who wrote that paper never even looked at the archaeological remains that are now in the San Diego Natural History Museum. What he based it on is reference, I'm quoting from the abstract of the paper itself, reference to a freeway right-of-way map and construction plans, contemporary road building practices, and work site photographs available on the internet. In other words, the site was not visited. They simply looked at secondary references. They did not look at the archaeological material, and they ignored the entire argument of Tom Desmarais and his colleagues, who had already addressed that issue.
They didn't look at the bones?
They did not look at the bones. When you break a fresh bone, it has a characteristic kind of spiral fracture that does not happen when you break a fossilized bone. And Tom Desmarais and his team specifically ruled out road-making machinery as responsible for this breaking pattern, because they actually carried out experiments on modern elephants, deceased elephants, and they broke their bones, and the kind of fracture that you get in a fresh green bone is completely different from the kind of fracture you get in a fossilized bone. So unfortunately, this paper pays no attention to that. It just looks at road plans and says there was road work there, it must have been done by road work. I think it's very sloppy, very weak, and it's certainly not the answer. We can expect ongoing debate, and that is healthy, but this is not a strong case.
So this points to the first evidence that we found. And is there any effort underway to try to uncover more evidence that from a similar time period?
Well, I'm going to cite Tom Desmarais, the chief paleontologist at the San Diego Natural History Museum. That's what he would like to see. He makes the point to me. I interview him. I spent a day with him at the Natural History Museum. He was very generous with his time. I did an extended interview, and I quote from it in America before. And his wish is that archaeologists, instead of spending all their time trying to find ways to dismiss and get rid of his findings, his wish is that they would spend a little bit of that time looking at deposits older than 13,400 years, and even being willing to go back as far as 130,000 years. That would be a proper scientific response. Here is a thorough body of work put forward by a very senior group of scientists who hesitated before they published it. They had the information back in the 1990s, but it wasn't until refined dating techniques later than in the 21st century that they finally were sure what they had, and that they published it in Nature in 2017. It's an important study, and I think what's going to happen is that we're going to find much more evidence of a very ancient human presence in the Americas, and that's what Tom Desmarais thinks as well. And as he points out, if we don't look, then we're never going to find. If we allow dogma to stop us looking and saying, oh, it's impossible that humans were in the Americas 130,000 years ago, so we won't bother to look, what a failure of science that is. And to spend all the time instead trying to get rid of the evidence that doesn't fit the current paradigm.
But it's so fascinating that just this fortuitous discovery during a construction site could change the way people perceive things. And
Yes.
you've got to wonder how much of that stuff is I mean, how deep did they have to go to find these mastodon bones?
Well, so this is a road cut that's being made. So those would be pretty deep down, 10, 15 feet down. The grader is going through and flattening them. It varies from place to place depending on soil deposition, the stratification of the soil. But what the key point is that what you need to do is go deeper than 13,400 years ago, and you need to do so with dedication and vigor and with some kind of funding. And at the moment, archaeology doesn't see the point of that. If the paper in Nature by Tom Desmarais was alone, if there were nothing else than that, I wouldn't place so much trust in it. But I've spent a lot of time during the researching of this book with archaeologists who did dig deeper. And what those archaeologists all confirm is that there have been human beings in the Americas for tens of thousands of years. And it's not surprising that can be pushed back to 130,000 years ago, because part of the argument about the peopling of the Americas has to do with a place that we now call the Bering Straits between Alaska and Siberia, which during the Ice Age were at times a land bridge. They were exposed because of lowered sea levels. But migrants who crossed that land bridge from Siberia on many occasions over periods of tens of thousands of years would find themselves confronted then by the North American ice cap, which oddly wasn't at the tip of Alaska, but began further in. So there was living space in a bit of Alaska, but you couldn't get through the ice mountains. These literally ice mountains, two miles deep, covering the whole of North America and preventing access to the unglaciated parts of America. The thing is that what happened around 13,400 years ago, there had been a period of global warming, and the ice sheets began to melt, and a corridor opened up between what's called the Cordilleran ice sheet and the Laurentide ice sheet, the two major ice caps in North America. And it's thought that the migration came through that corridor. Well, the thing is that exactly the same thing happened between 140,000 years ago and 120,000 years ago. There was an episode of global warming, an ice-free corridor opened up, and the same opportunity to enter the Americas was there at that period than it was at the later period. And Tom Demery's point and mine is that we have to pay much more attention to that earlier period, and that's really why I've gone ahead and written this book, is to try to put before a broad general audience, hopefully in language that makes sense, an assembly of all the latest information that casts doubt on the story we've been told. Because my goodness, if archaeology is wrong about the story of the peopling of the Americas, if it's radically wrong, as it now appears to be, then our whole understanding of human history has to change. It's not just the history of the Americas, it's the history of the entire world. It has been an absolute article of faith amongst archaeologists that civilization began in the old world. And indeed, I have a book in my library called History Begins at Sumer, and it's by Samuel Noah Kramer, a very renowned archaeologist. And it's a good book, actually. But the argument is that this is where civilization began, in the culture that we call the Sumerians in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and that it began about 6,000 years ago, and that civilization is entirely an invention of the old world and has nothing to do with the new world at all, because the new world was populated so late. This has been the argument, and this is the argument that now radically and suddenly begins to change, that the Americas, this enormous landmass, resource-rich, bountiful in every way, south of Minnesota, south of the ice cap, vast land areas that are bountiful, get into South America, Central America, South America, the Amazon, just huge areas of land that were very, very offered great potential for human occupation. Dogma has said there were no humans there. Now the first bits of evidence are coming out that says there were humans there. And if that's the case, then we must consider the possibility that the story of civilization might have begun in the Americas, not in the old world at all. It might be a new world invention, not an old world invention.
Some of the more fascinating pieces of evidence in South America have come out recently about these channels and pathways that they've found in the Amazon that could not have been created any other way but by humans.
Absolutely.
Creating irrigation, humans creating, like, it appears like grids, like a city grid.
Definitely. The Amazon is a colossal mystery, and it's one of the subjects that I explore in depth in America before. First of all, to give some basic figures, the Amazon basin is huge. The Amazon basin is 7 million square kilometers in area. And within it, 5.5 million square kilometers remains almost entirely unstudied by archaeologists. And that's the 5.5 million square kilometers that is still covered by dense rainforest. And to put that into perspective, 5.5 million square kilometers is the size of the entire Indian subcontinent. So it's like saying, we've done world archaeology, but we've just ignored India, you know. We've done world archaeology, but we've just ignored the Amazon. It's the same argument. 5.5 million square kilometers. The view was, again, there was a dogma. There was a preconception. Human beings couldn't have flourished in the Amazon. It's not a resource-rich area. The soils are poor. It's a difficult area, challenging to get to, very far from the Bering Straits.
Why?
So the view was that humans hadn't entered the Amazon until about 1,000 years ago. And then gradually, little by little, that view has begun to change. And it's begun to change because of the tragic clearances of the Amazon, because the Amazon rainforest is literally being cut down and turned into soybean farms and cattle ranches. And in that cutting down process has emerged things that shouldn't be there at all. For example, evidence that large cities flourished in the Amazon. Enormous cities, which were larger than there was a Spanish explorer who went down the Amazon River system in 1541 to 1542. He was the first European to cross the entire length of South America from west to east along the Amazon. He reported seeing incredible cities, advanced arts and crafts, millions of people, a thriving culture. And 100 years later, when other Europeans got into the Amazon, they couldn't find these cities. So they said, oh, Francisco Orellana, that was his name, made it all up. It was just a fantasy. And then in the last decade, as the clearances of the Amazon have proceeded, we've begun to see the traces of those cities. What happened was that the Spaniards brought smallpox into the Amazon. Smallpox devastated the local population because there was no immunity to it. There was a massive die-off. The cities were deserted. Within 50 years, they were completely overgrown by the jungle, and that's why they were not seen by the explorers who came in 100 years later. But now the jungle's being cleared, those cities are emerging, and we can say that a city like London, which had a population of roughly 50,000 in the 16th century, there were cities of that size all over the Amazon. Wow. Huge numbers of them. And a possible total population of the Amazon that exceeded 20 million people.
What?
Yes, 20 million. This is the latest evidence from the Amazon. And then you ask yourself, how did they do that? How did they feed 20 million people in the Amazon? Because it's a fact, rainforest soils are poor. It's one of the reasons these soybean farms are a really stupid idea, because once you clear the rainforest, the land is largely unfertile and you can't grow stuff on it for very long. So how did they feed all these people? The answer was they invented a soil. And that soil has a name. It's called terra preta. Archaeologists refer to it as Amazonian dark earths or Amazonian black earth. It's a man-made soil. It's thousands of years old. It's full of microbes that are not found in adjoining soil. It's based around biochar. And you can take a handful of 8,000-year-old terra preta and you can add it to barren soil, and that soil will instantly become fertile. It's highly sought after in the Amazon, and it explains how they fed these people. There was science in the Amazon.
How did they create this?
Well, this is something that's not understood. It's still not understood by soil experts to this day as to how that was done, but it's one of many intriguing pieces of evidence of much higher development in the Amazon that it has been given credit for, and of a kind of science in the Amazon.
Jamie's got an image of it up there. So this is it?
This is terrible.
Wow.
Exactly.
And so was that done by burns? Did they use controlled burns?
They did. One way that it was achieved was to do wet burning of middens. They would be burned and smolder. They wouldn't burn fiercely, which just produces charcoal. They would burn and smolder, and that what is called biochar would result, and that's part of the fertility of the soil. But the mystery is the microbial content of this soil, which is completely different from the microbes in neighboring soils, and that remains unexplained.
So, what are the theories? Composting, some sort of advanced composting?
Yes, some sort of advanced composting. But again, what has not been explained is the microbial content of these soils. So there, first of all, is an issue of how two things: how large populations get fed in the Amazon, and evidence that there was a culture in the Amazon that was capable of manipulating the environment in such a way that it could support large populations with the invention of terra preta. Secondly, new evidence previously not recognized. The Amazon is basically a garden. The Amazon is a man-made rainforest. There are certain trees like Brazil nut trees or the ice cream bean tree, which are food crops, which are very, very valuable, and they dominate the tree regime in the Amazon. They're what's referred to as hyperdominant species. In other words, people living in the Amazon over thousands of years selected certain trees, which they then cultivated and grew. So the whole thing is not simply a wild, pristine rainforest. It's a very ancient man-made environment. And emerging from that man-made environment, as well as evidence of large cities, large populations, and this mysterious dark earth, are huge geometrical structures. And again, I go into this at length in America before because I love this mystery. We have in the UK structures that are called henges. I live in the city of Bath, and about 30 miles away there's a beautiful site called Avebury, and another more famous site called Stonehenge. And what a henge is a ditch which has been dug deep, and then an embankment has been pushed up outside the ditch. When people first saw these structures, they wondered if they'd been built for defense. But then it became obvious they hadn't been built for defense, because if you want to create a moat, you put it outside your embankment, not inside your embankment. So a henge is an earthwork which consists of a deep moat with a large embankment outside it. And it can be circular, it can be square, and in the UK and other parts of Europe it often contains stone circles, megalithic stone circles as well, but the henge itself is entirely an earthwork. What we find in the Amazon are thousands of henges that are now beginning to emerge from the cleared area of the jungle, and others that have been identified for the first time with LiDAR. LiDAR technology is being employed in the Amazon. It's non-destructive. You can see what's under the trees.
What is LiDAR?
Light imaging and detective radar. They bounce laser beams down into the jungle. There's a whole pattern of them. You need helicopters, and but it doesn't damage the rainforest. And you can strip away and see what's there. If this isn't too much of a diversion, let me give you the example of Guatemala. Guatemala is a small country. If I remember correctly, it's not much more than 100,000 square kilometers in size. It is filled with intriguing Mayan ruins. Everybody has heard of Tikal. What archaeologists didn't know was that literally within walking distance of Tikal, surrounding that whole area were more than 60,000 structures that they hadn't identified. And these have all been identified by LiDAR in a country that's just 100,000 kilometers in area. So you have to ask yourself, in that 5.5 million square kilometers of the Amazon, if LiDAR technology could be applied comprehensively, what would we find beneath there? And the evidence already is extremely tempting and extremely tantalizing. And I'm intrigued by these huge geometrical figures, which involve primarily circles and squares. And they are classic henges in the sense that they are deep ditches surrounded by huge embankments. They're extremely geometrical. For example, you can find an octagon surrounding a square. At a place called Gyges in the Amazon, you can find a square perfectly enclosing a circle. Now that is an exercise called squaring the circle that our academics have given to the Greeks. They said the Greeks were the first people who performed that exercise. But now we find in dated sites in the Amazon that this was being done in the Amazon long before the Greeks.
What are the dates?
The earliest dates that have been found in these sites now are about 3,500 years old. About 3,500 years old. But the evidence is that the sites have been constantly remade. And what intrigues me is what remains in that 5.5 million square kilometers that has not been investigated yet. We are just, I think, looking at the edges of a mystery. The archaeologists involved, who are mainly from Finland and also from Brazil, feel the same. Their estimate is that there are thousands of these structures remaining in the jungle, and they're open as to how old they may ultimately prove to be. The investigation needs to be done, but what's fascinating about them is this very powerful geometry and astronomy. So a number of the sites are perfectly aligned to true north, true south, true east, and true west. I'm not talking about magnetic north, I'm talking about true astronomical north. To do that, there's only one way to do it, and that's with astronomy. So that tells us that astronomers were at work in the Amazon. The geometry is very complex and very precise. That tells us that people with geometrical skills were at work in the Amazon. And thirdly, the scale of the sites of hundreds of meters, gigantic earthworks on the scale of hundreds of meters, tells us that this was highly organized project that was undertaken on a very large scale by very large numbers of people. It's a wonderful mystery, and it deserves much further attention. And that's Gyges, exactly. The squares, squaring the circles. So you can see the outside.
Yo, thanks, buddy.
And then inside it is the square ditch. And then there's another embankment inside that, and a circle inside
a massive shawarma dinner last night.
Modern road, yeah, you know,
After
because
playing Breath of
there's
the
no
Wild
respect
right before going to sleep,
for the ancient
which I'm sure a lot of that turned into fat.
And there's another one.
So thanks for saying that.
Wow, that's incredible.
So there are thousands of these
found the stuff that they found
I could
in the
be
Amazon,
leaner.
what imaging
I could be
technology
leaner.
they're using to find.
Especially my bellies.
Initially,
I mean,
it was
my
entirely
stomach.
found because areas of the rainforest had been cleared.
My stomach.
Economic interest said, we want to make a cattle
The
ranch
virus
here.
had been fighting.
We want to make a soybean farm here. So we're just going
Has
to clear the rainforest. In the process of
focus
clearing the
on
rainforest, they start discovering these
doing
earthworks
more
that had
ab
previously
stuff.
been completely overgrown by the
I could be
jungle.
leaner.
Then the next step was to say, What can we do to find out more about this? Obviously, they don't want to destroy more jungle, and luckily we have a technology which is LiDAR, as I mentioned, which uses radar. And using LiDAR, they've been able to identify many more of these sites, and then to get to the sites without destroying the jungle, and to begin excavations on them, and to find that they go back, in the cases of the ones that have been explored so far, at least 3,000 years. This is an intriguing
the stomach flu. I don't know if you have that. You guys
in
have
our
a
understanding
cold.
of the Amazon. And what it suggests is a heritage of extremely ancient knowledge. You don't wake up one morning and create a perfectly geometrical square or circular earthwork that's perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west on an enormous scale.
Not
there has
having
to be
to
a
go
background
outside.
to that. There has to be a reason for doing it. And the evidence is none of these sites were lived in. There's no habitation refuse found in them whatsoever.
Yeah, I couldn't really.
We don't know.
Maybe that's
what
why.
they were used for.
Maybe that's why I look slim.
Make the case.
Because I ate less. I ate much less.
That they're connected to a system of ideas which is found all around the world, which is to do with death and the afterlife destiny of the soul. And I go into the issue of ayahuasca in this book because, first of all, ayahuasca is itself another example of Amazonian science. As you and I and many of the listeners and viewers know, the active ingredient of ayahuasca is DMT, dimethyltryptamine. But dimethyltryptamine is not normally accessible through the gut. We have to smoke it or vape it to get that rocket ship to the other side of reality. And the journey lasts, 10, 12 minutes, not much more than that, sometimes quite a lot less. What ayahuasca does is it makes DMT available through the gut. The reason it's not available through the gut is because of an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase. That switches off DMT.
How the heck did he shoot me? Like, what?
The ayahuasca vine, which is one of the two ingredients of the ayahuasca brew, the other ingredient is leaves that contain DMT. The ayahuasca vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which switches off the enzyme in the gut and allows the DMT to be accessed orally, which produces a rather different journey from the smoked or vaped DMT trip. It's a much longer journey. It's 4 or 5 hours. It allows you to integrate and to interrelate with the strange landscapes in which you find yourself amongst. And the entities that you encounter, I'm not making any claims about the reality status of those entities, but what I am saying, and it's a fact, is that people who work with DMT and ayahuasca do encounter what they construe to be entities who communicate with them intelligently. So somebody in the Amazon,
I think in the summer, hopefully, I don't know why I gain weight in the summer.
Selected 2 that are not psychoactive on their own.
Should be the opposite.
When put together, create an extraordinary visionary brew. And
maybe
ayahuasca means
more in the
vine of the dead. And what it's connected to,
I drink way more water.
South American religious and spiritual thinking is what happens to us when we die. The Tucano, who are an Amazonian people who work regularly.
Yeah, I was going to say thank God for Uber Eats. That was literally what I was going to say, but I was like, there's no way it's actually cheaper
they feel ayahuasca
forever.
Is so important that there is a hidden realm.
It's good for groceries. I see the deals they have for groceries is very good.
Is an important part of that.
They have like
in their
buy $70 of groceries, get like
$20
or $30 off or some shit.
It's like what? Normal problem-solving state of consciousness, and they will paint.
But for food, yeah.
And what's intriguing,
but for
and
restaurants,
it's quite a number of the Tucano paintings.
They have their own
of
special
the
prices,
of the
right?
Realm,
like
the
like $2 more plus all the bullshit.
And they look exactly like
wow,
geoglyphs.
yeah.
So I'm beginning to wonder whether these geoglyphs were part of
exactly.
a system of spiritual ideas concerning
Uber one, yeah,
what
they gave me
happens to
like a
us after
free
death and what we need
trial
to do
for a
in this
period,
life to
right?
ensure a beneficial outcome.
Yeah.
And oddly enough,
I think
that
it gave me
same
3
system of
months
ideas is found
for
in
like
the Mississippi
$10.
Valley. In the Amazon, it involves
So I took it. It was like $3 a month.
ayahuasca, and the belief that the ayahuasca journey takes you to the afterlife
2
realm
months for
and a journey
$150.
along the Milky Way. In the Mississippi Valley, the mound builder sites up and down the Mississippi Valley, particularly Moundville in Alabama, exactly the same system of religious ideas associated with geometrical constructions. That on death, the soul, they're very specific, ascends to the constellation of Orion, transits from the constellation of Orion to the Milky Way, makes a journey along the Milky Way, which they call the Path of Souls, and encounters challenges and ordeals where the soul must account for the life that it has lived.
I almost just bought randomly.
Then we go to Egypt. And what do we
looked
find?
for like
The same
groceries.
system of ideas. The
That's
soul
such a
must rise up to the
shitty job,
constellation of
though,
Orion.
dude.
There's
Doing
a
the
narrow
grocery
shaft
job.
cut
That's
through
such
the
a
southern
shit
side of
job.
the Great Pyramid of
That
Giza,
means you gotta
which
go.
targets
The
directly
Uber
the
driver
lowest of the
goes
three
in
stars
and
of Orion's
collects
belt.
all the shit
Widely
themselves.
accepted as a star shaft or a soul shaft. The soul would rise up through that shaft,
It's such a
get to the
shit
constellation
job.
of Orion, which stands by the banks of the Milky Way. It would then transit to the Milky Way, which the ancient Egyptians called the winding waterway, and it would make a journey along the Milky Way,
more expensive
where it
for
would
me
be
to go.
confronted
Yeah,
by
that's
challenges
insane.
and ordeals. Very similar
Nice,
idea
buddy.
to the Tucano, very similar idea to the
Hell yeah,
Mississippi
man.
Valley. As far as we know, none of these cultures were in contact with one
Dude,
another.
did you see
Either
the
we're dealing
viral
with
video?
huge, unbelievable,
Remember how we were
extraordinarily
talking
detailed coincidence
also with
involving
Sailor
architecture
Person and
and
everyone
ideas, or we're looking at the
that
legacy
there's no
that
way
was
I'm gonna
inherited
deliver
in all
alcohol
of these different places from a remote
because
ancestor. And I believe that that's what we're looking at.
there's
What do
this
we think
issue
the
of
people
like
from the ancient
you
Mississippi
can't
Valley,
deliver
that
if they're
culture,
drunk
what do
or
we think
whatever.
they
And
were
that
using
viral
if they
video
weren't
came
using
out
ayahuasca? Or do we
of the
think
woman and the
that's
guy
what they were
fighting,
using?
kind of.
Well, that's an
Not really
interesting
fighting, but like it got really
question.
fucking
Whether
kind of tense.
visionary substances are the only way
You
to
grab,
get
they
into
kind of
altered
like
states of
pushing and
consciousness.
shoving,
I
grabbing
would
the
say
bottle from the other
they are
person.
definitely not. Of course, there are visionary
Jesus
substances.
Christ! It's
which
not
are
really
used
scary,
in
but it's just
Native
like
American,
it's like what
vision-
we were
vision
saying
quests. I've had
would
the
happen.
privilege
Like
of
went viral.
peyote ceremony.
There was a
with the Native
female
American
driver,
church.
Uber
I've
driver.
never done that. What
She
is
didn't
that
want to
like?
give the guy the
I
beer.
loved it actually.
The
I
liquor,
thought
the
it was-
fort,
I thought
whatever
it
it
was
was.
amazing. It doesn't overpower you in the way that DMT or ayahuasca does. It's
just
much
like
gentler.
shit,
it's
man.
much more. You feel much more integrated.
I think I
and
dodged a
connected
bullet,
with nature.
literally.
The thought processes are quite clear. It felt just like a very beautiful and healing experience, and I love the
You get, like,
ceremony.
robbed.
I'm inside a teepee with 30 or 40 other people, and there are
Kids
specific
do it.
roles that are assigned
The
to those different individuals. One will keep the door,
what's it
another will be
called?
responsible for the fire, which is a work of
The
art in
stunt?
itself. Just gazing into that
So
fire and the
stiff. What's it
the
called?
glowing embers is
Stint?
enough to induce an altered state of consciousness
Where they fuck
on
you?
its own. Incredible drumming.
They
which-
set up
which
the illegal,
drives your
the
state of consciousness into
underage
a kind of
child,
peak experience.
the
This is a
plant,
technology for accessing
and the cops
other levels
watching.
of experience and other levels of reality. And it's clear that the Native Americans had a
Sting.
number of
That's what it
advanced
is.
technologies in this area. The sun dance doesn't use a substance, but
Bro,
it
she's
uses
wanting to seem
austerity,
so
it
bad.
uses pain
Go-
to
go
drive an
shopping
altered
with-
state of consciousness.
Yeah,
The
but then
objective
you gotta
in
stand
every
in
case seems to
line
be,
shopping for
let's
other people's
just for
groceries.
a while get ourselves out of the narrow,
And then
rigid
you gotta
frame
you gotta
of the alert
walk. Like
problem-solving
it's so much
state of consciousness. We
walking.
all need that. It's incredibly
so much-
useful.
it
Hunter-gatherers
adds so
need it
much
just as
time
much as
walking
people
also.
in cities need it. But it's not the only state of consciousness available to human beings. And maybe that's one of the big mistakes that we're making in our culture, and was not made in shamanistic societies.
Like Walmart,
That is
they
a
pre-make
really
it.
interesting breakdown. That maybe that is
But
one
then
of the
you
big
gotta sit
mistakes
in
we're
some
making in our
parking
culture.
lot, and
People
then the
point
fucking
to
wages don't
problems
give
that
a
we have
fuck.
in this country. One of the problems
So
we
they,
have
like,
is
take forever.
our inability to connect with each
Which
other.
you
or to
can't
recognize that we're all
never do
sharing
Walmart.
space and time
They take
together,
forever.
and instead wanting to uphold
And maybe
our
in
own
like Montreal,
religious
Toronto,
or
they
ideological
pre-pack the
ideas
food.
as being the only one way to get
And
going.
you can
the only
have
one
that
way to get
service,
through.
but
And one of the things
no,
that I've
here
found
when I was
these
doing it, it
psychedelic
was
experiences,
you go
it-
in and
it
fucking
really
grab the
makes
shit.
ideologies
But Montreal might be
seem,
pre-packed
if
now.
not preposterous, at the very least insignificant. in
It's much more
comparison to human
efficient.
Experiences. The
Absolutely.
experience of camaraderie and
Kind of like
friendship
Staircycle,
and love.
where the
you realize,
driver
like,
would
oh, this is what's
unpack the
important. This is
waste
what's
This is
important
what's
is
really
themselves.
not enforcing your
and
ideas
that
or
changed.
pushing them on other people and forcing people to behave the way you behave, but
Yeah.
instead love.
And think about religious ideas, which cause so much division, so much chaos, so much hatred, so much fear, so much suspicion in the world today. Is it really what we want to do as human beings? Simply to accept a package of ideas that were believed in by our ancestors, to accept them whole, without question, as absolute fact,
Oh my god.
which we regard as such authoritative fact that in some cases we're willing to be deeply
Jesus
unpleasant to
Christ.
people who hold different views, or perhaps even kill them. We've had this, this recent event in Sri Lanka, primarily a
What was he
religiously
expecting
motivated
with-
terrorist event. It happens
What
all
was
over the
he-
world.
what
People
was he
feel so
thinking?
convinced that the inherited package of ideas that they had nothing to do with creating
Would be the
and that they
fallout
have
of
never
that.
questioned, they're so convinced that those ideas are right that in extreme cases they're actually prepared to kill other
That's
human
crazy,
beings
man.
who hold different ideas. Are they so insecure in their own beliefs that they're prepared to go to that level of actually murdering another human being who holds it? They're so threatened by the other beliefs that other human beings hold. So it's an abnegation of our responsibility as human beings. We should be questioning things. We should not be accepting packages of ideas intact, fully formed, and using them to drive the way we behave towards one another. That was part of the human story, but we need to move on from that. And it's a very dangerous situation in a very complex modern world with billions of human beings on the planet, to have these kind of energies being generated where certain groups of people are saying, we are absolutely right and you are absolutely wrong. We are superior, you are inferior.
But I mean,
this is a very, very dangerous.
Did you not expect the violence to ensue?
It needs to be changed. Personally,
and it's like it's occurring in his house.
It's like
a comment that will go down well with many people. His house.
I am strongly opposed to nationalism.
And they have his contact, his phone number.
I don't see any virtue in nationalism. It is an accident of birth. Which nation you were born in. It was nothing that you did for your own merit. You didn't earn that. You were born by accident
in a black wig
in a particular nation. Why should we automatically feel that other people who were born by accident in that particular nation have something special in common with us, and that we together are a group who are much more important than other groups of people? I've been privileged to spend my life traveling around the world, living with communities all over the world, and one thing that really comes across to me strongly, it should be a cliche, and yet it's not, is that we are all one family, that humans are intimately interconnected all around the world, that you can go to the remotest area of the Amazon jungle and find the same hopes, the same fears, the same dreams that we have in industrialized cities, shared by the hunter-gatherers in the middle of the Amazon. So our similarities as human beings and what we share in common at the emotional level and the level of love and at the level of heart are far more important than our differences that are defined by the nation or the political group in which we grew up in. And when I say I'm against nationalism, I need also to make clear that does not mean.
So what happened with the first one?
I'm not taken out of context.
So you said the second guy. What happened with the first guy? Sort of laugh.
That's another thing we need to grow out of. We don't need governments anymore. If we have them, they should have a very minimal role in our society. I think it's possible for the human race to relate as one family without leaders and governments who are exploiting the worst aspects of our character, the lowest common denominator of our society, deliberately encouraging fears and hatreds and suspicion. What responsible leaders should be doing is encouraging love and unity, and their failure to do that, in my view, disqualifies them from the leadership role entirely. And that's why I've often said I would like to see a situation in which no head of state can be appointed to that position unless he or she has first had 12 sessions of ayahuasca. That would be the condition. Don't even bother applying for the job if you haven't done this.
And we have to be there where you have it.
And we want to see that you're drinking every drop. And we want an experienced
the first guy's going to come out
who's really going to guide you through the journey. And I suspect that would be a transformative experience for many of our political class.
And that they would start to question
why they do what they do, why they exploit fears in order to magnify their own position. They'd start to question that and to wonder about a different
suffer the consequences.
But that's a dream. I guess it's not going to happen.
It's very, very, very well said, and I couldn't agree more. My hope is that what you were saying, what we were discussing earlier about how the internet has sort of eroded our faith in many institutions as being the only or the primary source of knowledge. That I hope that takes place
clown world that makes
globally.
When would I ever say that makes total sense?
Your idea of like I love what America stands for.
Other than in 2024,
kind of a nation that's
in Canada,
where people go to. You know, this is one of the more insidious problems with this
that makes sense.
idea of building walls and keeping people out and making it incredibly difficult to get here. The reason why I'm here is because it was pretty easy to get here.
Oh my God.
That's why I'm here.
That's the essence of America, a free and open society.
Come here and do better. That's the whole idea behind it. And I would hope that this idea of being able to just, if you want to do better, you can anywhere in the world. This could eventually spread out.
You know what it is?
My hope.
I believe it can spread out, and I see many signs
People
of
are
hope.
desperate, man. Have you
America.
been on those dating apps?
America has become a
Women,
big part of my
I don't
life,
know.
not
I don't know
just
if they
because I
just
wrote
are
this
super
book, but because
saturated
I have
with
children who are now living in
replies.
America. I have a son and daughter-in-law who
man,
live in LA. I have another son and daughter-in-law who live in
being
Boston.
on dating
America,
app,
I'm British, but
it
America
makes
has
you
become a
lose-
very central part of my life, and it's a
because you
fascinating
see,
and
you
amazing
get like an
country, and
image
it's been my privilege to
into
travel thousands of miles across America, across many, many,
like
many different states,
humanity,
and I
all of
love this country.
humanity.
It's an amazing
No, not all of
place.
humanity.
Only
All of humanity
in
on like
America could we see
Tinder or
happening what has
whatever,
happened
dating
with
app.
cannabis. You know,
So-
the fact that at a local level,
The
individuals
amount of
have got together,
ghosting.
mobilized petitions,
Yeah.
organized votes, and changed the law.
When did
Changed the
ghosting
law.
become
Literally
mainstream?
stuck a finger up at central government and said,
When
fuck
did
off.
ghosting
This
become
is
the
none of
norm?
your business. What I do with my consciousness in the inner sanctum of my own life
Man,
is not the business
the
of the state.
dating
That's a
app,
very American feeling. It's something that
it's
you
like
don't
impossible
find
to
often
get
in
any
other countries where the
communication.
state is granted much
like
more
impossible.
power and much more authority than it perhaps should be. Americans are naturally questioning of government
Like, it's
authority.
crazy.
And that is what has led to the legalization, increasing legalization of cannabis, which is going to change the world in lots of ways. But then, ironically,
So
at the same time,
to have someone
the
at
thing
least
about
respond,
democracies,
I could totally
is
see.
that
I
in
could
order
totally
to,
see like
get things done in a democracy, you need
'cause
to
even, like,
persuade
at the
people of your
end,
point of view. So information
I'm
becomes
sure
very
people
important
respond to
in
bots,
democracies. And information
knowing
can
they're
be abused.
bots,
People can be misled with
but
information.
because they
can
have
be
no other
told that what they're
responses.
receiving is the
Not
truth,
even
whereas
one.
in fact it's not the truth. And you can end up with a kind of
Which is
dictatorship that the people have given their assent to on the basis of
It is
false
what it
information.
is.
And frankly, I'd rather have a real dictatorship, which is out in the open and clear, rather than
But
one
it's
that has been
crazy.
subtly
So I
manipulated
could totally
into
see
position
a
through
responsive
manipulating the views of
entity
of the voters. But I am
for
and
100%.
remain enormously encouraged by America. It
And
may
a
seem like
liar,
a
a
trivial
lying
issue,
entity.
but the fact that state by state cannabis is being legalized, and that is resulting from a grassroots movement, that this enormous change has been made. It's ironic, it's strange that at the federal level, even though, 8 states now totally legal for recreational, 24 states legal for
what are you
medical
saying,
use,
like-
that at the federal level it's
like
still a
they-
Schedule
like
1
he had a little
drug.
hole, like
This is a huge state
he-
of dissonance that
the
exists,
guy
and America's going to have
did
to put
it like
right.
in the butt
What it says to me is that people
In
can
the other guy's
change
butt?
things. People can get together at the local level.
through the hole.
And they can make a better
And it
world. Because
hurt.
there's no doubt that the cannabis laws were vicious and wrong and cruel and evil and ruined people's lives for decades.
It's too much,
And
man.
it's people who've changed that. It's not
I
government
wanna
who's
know what
changed
the
that. It's
voice
people at the
sounded
grassroots
like.
level. America's a country
No.
where that can happen. And I remain encouraged about the role of the
I
American
don't
people,
understand.
while often in despair
They have
about
anal
the role of the
sex?
American state.
Yeah, I'm encouraged as well. And you know, it's interesting. Ben and Jerry released something yesterday, which is really, or on 420, I should say, which
Curious
was
now.
talking about the drug laws in this country.
Catfish.
And talking about how many.
Anonymous
It's really
sex through a
opening this
hole.
the idea of
anal
like
sex.
how unjust these laws were, and how many of these laws targeted people of color, and how many
Come on,
people
man, you
who are
gotta-
white people have profited off of this, and how many people are still in jail.
Yes.
For crimes that they committed, you know, air quote crimes that are no longer crimes.
That are no longer crimes.
Yeah, and this is ridiculous. And these
Like,
records
he
should be
raped
expunged.
They
the
should be
People should be
fucking
expunged.
I
guys
see that California has made
in
some
the
steps in
ass?
that direction. There has
Yes.
been some expunging of records.
Yes. Well, we can only hope that also what opens up next is psilocybin is now going to be on the ballot.
Or
Absolutely.
And when that
he
opens up,
let
I mean,
the guy
you
put
really think marijuana is a gateway drug? Well, guess what?
his thing
it is
in
if psilocybin gets
his
it.
ass.
Yes,
Because psilocybin can legitimately change the world.
it certainly can.
It really, I mean, I think marijuana can change the world, and I really do think that cannabis is changing
That's
people's
terrible.
perceptions and making
That's
people
really
more
just wrong.
calm and friendly. And,
Yeah.
Wow.
and even what they talk about with paranoia, I welcome that. And the reason why I welcome that
Why
is I
would the
think people are
guys
entirely
do it,
too
though?
cocky.
Yeah.
They're not
the
that
life we
desperate.
live is
that-
bizarre
'cause that's what
as
you
you
were
could
asking.
ever imagine
I
in a
understand
book.
now.
And we're just accustomed to it because
Yeah.
it's our day-to-day
Take it all for
existence.
granted.
Maybe they're just
Yeah.
gay.
Marijuana removes those blinders.
There's fine,
and
nothing
it
wrong with
really
it. There's nothing wrong with
makes
that,
you
but it's just not for me.
understand that this is a strange,
Definitely something
strange
wrong
life.
with lying and
these-
raping.
A lot of these pitfalls and problems that we have in our society are due to fear, and they're due to ignorance, and they're due to this lack of connection with each other. And cannabis and many of these other psychedelic drugs they encourage this connection with each other, which is, I think, what we need.
It's certainly what we need, and it's an aberration in human culture that we've created a society that demonized these substances and that made them illegal. It's a relatively recent thing. It's really just the last 100 years. It's a tiny part of the human story, and yet we're so arrogant as a society that we can set aside thousands of years of human tradition and experience and wisdom working with the plant medicines. We just set it aside, turn them into criminal substances, and say we know everything. What a huge and stupid mistake that is. On cannabis as a quote-unquote gateway drug, it absolutely is in this sense that the legalization of cannabis is going to open the doors to, as you say, to the legalization of psychedelics, because what's happening is that the population is completely waking up to the fact that they have been bullshitted and lied to about cannabis for the best part of a century.
Oh, this is a nice run. This is a nice one. We're going to do no body armor.
Realization at a direct personal level. Here's this herb I love. I have been lied to, systematically misinformed by central government about this herb. That leads to questioning of everything that central government does. And so in that sense, it is a gateway to a questioning society. The psychedelics are different in that psilocybin actually does lead you to question stuff. It leads you to really ask questions about everything, about your role in the world, about you as a person, about how you relate to other people, and about the whole system on this planet and the beautiful, gorgeous planet that we have and what we're doing to it. That also enters awareness. So
it erodes confidence and authority, and it also erodes confidence and authority that doesn't have experiences that you've experienced.
Exactly.
That's the part of the problem, is that these people that are holding people back from these psychedelic experiences, they've never had them.
They've never had them.
So they don't even know what they're rallying
They're
against.
coming to it from a place of fear and prejudice. They're simply accepting stuff that they've been told without really thinking it through and examining it. And again, it's a failure of what human beings should be doing. We have to get rid of this fear.
And ironically, it's bad for them as well. It's bad for the people that are actually encouraging these laws to be enforced.
Yes, it's bad for the whole of society, because it is healthy for a society where adults become self-realized individuals, where they make their own responsible choices about their own lives, where they don't say, oh, government must make this choice for me. That's the next step for humanity. We need to start becoming our own leaders and making our own choices. And that is what's being revealed now, that we're getting to the skull beneath the smile of the war on drugs. We're realizing that it's part of a big program of lying that has been about keeping people's minds closed down, not wanting free thinking. I've made this point several times, but our society is not against altered states of consciousness as such. Our society will allow Big Pharma to make billions of dollars with drugs that alter consciousness, like Seroxat and Prozac, antidepressants, which, in my opinion, having had some experience of them, are amongst the most horrible drugs on the planet. They are very harmful, very dangerous drugs, but they're completely legal and they're encouraged with our system. Likewise, alcohol, very dangerous drug, causes fights, causes drunk driving accidents, leads to cirrhosis of the liver, completely legal and open. Our society is not against altered states of consciousness. As such, it's against particular kinds of altered states of consciousness that lead to questioning of the existing control system. That's what's going on
here. Hear, hear. Well said.
And as you know, I have my own story with cannabis.
Yes, well, you and I had a moment.
We had a moment, which was quite a life-changing moment for me, because if I may just rehearse a little bit of this for the audience. In 2011, I had a series of ayahuasca sessions in which it was shown to me that I was using cannabis completely wrong. That it had become a dominant force in my life, that it was making me, you're speaking about paranoia, and I agree with you, paranoia is a useful thing, if only to overcome it, that it was making me paranoid, that it was making me suspicious, that I approached everybody around me in a state of suspicion. And I was shown this by ayahuasca, and given a very strong message: you need to quit cannabis. What I didn't realize at the time is that the problem was not cannabis, the problem was me. That I needed to fix those aspects of myself before I could have a proper relationship with cannabis. So after that ayahuasca session, having smoked cannabis for decades, literally 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, I quit. I quit for 3 years. And then I'm on your show, and we're sitting opposite one another as we are now. And you ask me a question: are you still off the cannabis?
8 years old,
and I
10
say,
years old.
well, I'm thinking of dipping my toes back in the water. At which point you produce a joint, and we smoke it together. First of all, after 3 years, your tolerance is way down on cannabis. So I got really stoned. I did listen to that interview back, and somehow I held it together.
Oh, you held it together brilliantly. You opened up, and it was like a wave of information came pouring out of you. It was wonderful to watch.
It was a liberation for me, and what it said to me is, it's time to go back to cannabis, but perhaps in a different way.
I don't know, man. If that fucking Korean guy that
and if I can
beheaded a guy in Alberta on the bus,
then it can be a
just
constructive
be walk free in the cities.
I can say definitely that has
I
been
always
the
think
case.
back to that.
And so it's all
That's
thanks
kind
to
of
you,
like
Joe.
the
I probably would still
standard,
be off cannabis if it hadn't
the
been for that
limit.
joint.
That's kind of my
people can develop these
shit
patterns
test
of behavior
limit
that are destructive
of
with anything, whether it's with alcohol or cannabis or
how much someone can get away with.
They get in ruts, and it doesn't
still
mean
kinda
that
like
the
walk
cannabis
free.
is bad. It means that you are on a bad mental path.
Exactly.
And I'm not encouraging it for everybody because some people it genuinely biologically doesn't jive with them.
Yeah.
He did not do that.
The fundamental thing is we as adult human beings need to take responsibility for our own lives and our own decisions.
Dude,
and we need not hand that responsibility over to governmental institutions,
Jesus
especially when it
Christ,
concerns something as intimate and personal as our consciousness. And my view is the ancient world had the right attitude to this kind of thing, and the modern world does not.
My next door neighbor,
sit down and learn.
They're from Myanmar, Burma.
A lot of people ask me.
I never knew this.
You know, Hancock, you've been arguing that there's been a lost civilization
in the 80s.
In the human story.
The Khmer Rouge,
what sort of civilization do you think it was? Well, one of the things I think
group that was doing the genocide in like Cambodia, I think
it was a civilization that emerged from shamanism,
and they said that
did not
like
stay at the
a couple of
hunter-gatherer stage, but that took the essence of shamanism and
were just
integrated
shot
it into
dead
a
at
very
school. They
different
showed
kind
the
of
one day at school,
civilization
and
from
they just
our
like
which
guys
pursued
came
things in
shot
different
everyone.
ways. A lot of archaeologists
So
have said to
then,
me,
like, we
but
need
we
to
don't
get the fuck
find
out
any
of here.
plastic bottles from the Ice
And they
Age.
just
That means there was
fled
no
Burma in the
advanced
80s.
civilization during the
And
Ice
it's
Age.
like, holy
Well, hang
shit,
on.
dude, like-
Maybe an advanced civilization
And
might
that
have
guy
decided
was,
never
like-
to get involved in
It
plastic
wasn't
in the
it
first
wasn't
place.
Burmese.
Maybe
but
there would have been a clear choice not to make
the guy
plastic.
that
Maybe they did things in
I think he was
completely different
Korean.
ways. Maybe
Man,
they
like that's like
cultivated
another.
powers of
I'm
the
not
human
saying they
mind
do that
that
in,
we
in like
dismiss
Asia,
and
but
regard as
just saying the
completely,
world is
completely unimportant.
another place, man.
Woo-woo.
Like
Yeah,
my
this is the
mom
thoughts
was a
about
kind of,
Egypt,
well,
correct?
definitely
It's
a refugee.
about Egypt
Yeah.
and
a lot of
and
people
about
killed
other
in
things.
Lebanon in war.
The specific example I give is
Like their
above
family
the
members
King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid are 5 further
saved
chambers.
everyone, the
And
family, the
these
Lebanese
chambers
family.
are
I didn't
roofed
know
and
that.
floored
So my neighbor
with granite beams that
was
weigh
also
about 70
A
tons
war
each.
refugee from the
And there are
80s.
hundreds of them.
It's
And
crazy.
these
eh?
70-ton granite beams, which to put in context, a 70-ton beam is equivalent in weight to 35 large SUVs. These 70-ton granite beams have been elevated to a height of more than 350 feet above the ground and
he's in
carefully
China?
and precisely placed in position.
Another one?
It is very hard
What?
for archaeologists to explain how that was done
Oh my
using
God.
purely leverage and mechanical advantage. You can say, oh, perhaps they built a ramp and hauled the stones up the ramp. But then you have to confront basic laws of physics. You can't haul a stone weighing tens of tons up a slope that exceeds 10 degrees. Then you start doing the calculation. How long a ramp do I need with a 10-degree slope to get to 350 feet above the ground? And the answer is you need a fucking long ramp, which should still be there, because it couldn't have been a sand ramp. It would have collapsed under the weight of those stones. It had to be as massive as the pyramid itself. So this begins to seem like an absurd idea, the idea that is foisted on us by archaeology. Maybe the idea that they regard as absurd, namely that psychic powers were cultivated by ancient civilizations, that they could use powers of the human mind that we have allowed to lapse, maybe that idea deserves further consideration. We have gone down a path of leverage and mechanical advantage. We're used to relying on machines, but we hear anecdotal reports of people who have telekinetic powers, who can move things with their minds, of people who have telepathic powers. And our automatic reaction is to just dismiss dismiss all of that because science says it's impossible. Because science regards consciousness as local to the brain and doesn't see how it can exert itself outside of that. But maybe we should open up to those possibilities, that we're dealing with a very different kind of culture that used techniques that we have allowed to lapse. And maybe we could wake those techniques up again. Maybe the ability of human beings to do almost superhuman things is resident within all of us, but sleeping.
Well, it's pure speculation that they use some sort of a telekinetic power, but it's
pure
absolute.
Speculation.
But it's absolute that they did something that we don't understand. If you think about the distance between us and the construction, just the modern accepted construction dates of the Great Pyramid, it's more than 5,000 years ago, or close to 5,000 years ago.
Great Pyramid is supposed to be about 4,500 years old, yeah.
That's really old.
It's incredibly old, yeah.
To think that someone back then could do something that would perplex us today with modern machinery. Yeah. And that somehow or another they figured this out. It's almost like what they had done was leave behind something that was so stupendous.
Yeah, I don't know.
Monstrously impressive that it would transcend time.
Yeah.
And that
I don't think the no body armor is really. That wasn't even that fast. I've had much faster runs. Like I don't think the no body armor.
This is not a simple. And I've seen some of the conventional explanations of the construction of the pyramid, and they conveniently neglect those chambers above the king's chamber.
They do.
They conveniently neglect a lot of those massive stones. Yeah. And it's because it's one of those things you just go, oh, I don't know. What is this, Jamie?
They're the chambers above the king's chambers, and each one of those floors consists of a row of 70-ton granite blocks that have been raised 350 feet above the ground, and not only that, but brought from Aswan in the south of Egypt, 500 kilometers south of the Great Pyramid. So
if there's any time in history where you could go in a time machine and go back and observe, would that be the time?
I am just completely fascinated by the Ice Age.
The Ice Age.
That's crazy,
man. If you
man.
had one shot to go back and see what it was like in some place, you wouldn't go to the construction of the Great Pyramids?
I think right now where I'd go is 12,800 years ago in the beginning of the Younger Dryas.
Just to see.
Because I think that's where the whole human story changes. I think that's where we change tracks from one path to another path, and following those cataclysmic events of the Younger Dryas between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, following those, the signs of civilization that we see emerging are not the beginnings of civilization. They're a restarting of civilization that had existed before the cataclysm. And for that reason, I would like to be present during that cataclysmic event, if only to satisfy myself that it was indeed a comet. You see, the one thing there's no dispute about anymore is that the
unaccompanied pass to the community.
You can't argue about
what does that mean?
The megafauna that die off, the disruption of human activity that takes place at that time, the huge climate changes. This was a cataclysm by any standards. Where the argument still goes on is what caused the cataclysm. I vote strongly for comet, multiple fragments of a comet hitting the North American ice cap and hitting Greenland as well. But there are other researchers in the field, like my colleague Robert Schoch, who thinks that the sun is more involved. This is healthy. This is very, very healthy. That we should be approaching this problem from many different perspectives and trying to figure out what the fuck caused this extraordinary event that occurs at a pivotal moment in the human story. The end of the Stone Age, the beginning of the Mesolithic, the end of the Ice Age, the beginning of the current age of the Earth. And suddenly we see these signs of civilization appearing, and in places like Quebec, those signs already include highly sophisticated knowledge. And that's why I feel we really need to investigate the Amazon. There are 3 places in the world which are really lacking in the investigation right now. One of them is the Amazon, 5.5 million square kilometers, very little archaeology done. Another is the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert, tough place to work. I can understand why there's little archaeology done there, but the Sahara Desert was green during the Ice Age. It had a completely different climate regime. We should consider the possibility that missing parts of the human story are there. And then under the continental shelves, because sea level rose 400 feet. These are 3 domains that archaeology has largely not investigated, and it has largely not done so. They say, well, why would we spend the money on marine archaeology? It's much better to spend it on looking for shipwrecks rather than looking for signs of a lost civilization, because we archaeologists know there was no lost civilization. So that's the argument for the resources there, and the same with the Amazon, and the same with the Sahara Desert. The very places in the world that those amongst us who are charged with the responsibility of interpreting the past have not looked at are the very places we should be looking at.
I had a thought once while I was under the influence, and it was a thought that one day computational powers will reach a point where they will be able to take into consideration all of the objects on Earth and what we know about the history, and vividly recreate the past through computation, to the point where you could actually know who did what, when people did things, and that, I mean, I don't even know if this would be physically. Today, certainly not be possible, but with the exponential increase in computational power and technology and innovation, that one day we'll reach a point where you'll be able to watch, you'll be able to see what happened, and they'll be able to recreate what happened exactly, and that this would be something that would be, I mean, it's impossible for us to imagine that someone would be able to do that right now.
Yeah.
But that one day, with technology, as it gets more and more advanced, we will reach some sort of some innovation or some sort of an invention that will allow us to go back and see, literally see what happened, how things were done.
Technology is changing our whole understanding of the past, and what you're envisaging is perfectly possible. We will come to a time, if we
100 years, 500 years,
perhaps less, if we don't, first destroy ourselves entirely as a civilization, we will come to a time where our cleverness and our techniques will allow a much wider opening up of the past than has presently happened. But it is already happening. One of the areas of science that I go into in America before is genetics and DNA. This is an area of science that was not much informing archaeology until about the 1990s, but since the 2000s has become very important in archaeology, because the technology has been developed where ancient DNA can be extracted and tested, and you can actually genotype an entire individual from DNA that may be 15, 20,000 years old. And this new technology of genome sequencing and DNA is another factor that is raising huge question marks over the past of the Americas. And one of the issues I go into in this book is the presence in the Amazon rainforest of a very specific, clearly identifiable pattern of DNA, which is only found in one other place in the world, and that is in Australasia, in Papua New Guinea, and amongst Australian Aborigines. It's Australasian DNA. Now,
in South America.
Not only in South America, but in the depths of the Amazon rainforest, amongst tribes who've only been contacted in the last 20 or 30 years. And furthermore, although skeletal remains are rare, it has been found in ancient skeletal remains that are close to 11,000 years old in the Amazon. So that tells us that this DNA signal has been in the Amazon for at least 11,000 years. The geneticists think that it came to the Amazon during the last ice age. And this raises a huge mystery, because the peopling of the Americas is supposed to have occurred from Siberia, across the Bering Straits, down through that ice-free corridor into North America, down through North America, into South America, into Central America, and finally into South America. If that was the whole story, then we would find this DNA signal in North America and in Central America. We would not find it only in the Amazon. When I talked to some of the leading geneticists about this, specifically Professor Eske Willislev at the University of Copenhagen, who's been the lead author in a number of major studies of ancient DNA. And I asked him, what do you make of this Australasian DNA in the Amazon? And he said, honestly, we don't have a proper explanation for it at the moment. But what he did say is that the most parsimonious explanation, he used that specific word, the most parsimonious explanation is that a group of people during the Ice Age crossed the Pacific Ocean and settled up and ended up in South America and settled in the Amazon and brought their DNA with them. That would account perfectly for the DNA data. And when a scientist says the most parsimonious explanation, what that scientist is saying is he likes that explanation, that it's a simple, direct, clear explanation of the DNA mystery. But then he added, however, it doesn't make practical sense. And I asked him, well, why doesn't it make practical sense? And he said, because the archaeologists tell me that no human population was capable of crossing the Pacific Ocean during the Ice Age, at which point it was natural for me to say, do you really trust the archaeologists? And he said, well, in science, we do trust the work of other scientists. We don't really question it. We don't really investigate it. That's their side of the business. And my view is that is rather than taking this weird, anomalous Australasian DNA signal in the heart of the Amazon as something to be explained away, and as something for it to be denied that it could be connected to a voyage across the Pacific Ocean. Maybe it's the first compelling evidence that voyages were taking place across the Pacific Ocean during the Ice Age. And maybe we should be opening up that whole issue for exploration. And again, I think a lost civilization is the best answer. And that near the end of the Ice Age, when the Younger Dryas cataclysm unfolds, it's not an overnight thing. It's very bad 12,800 years ago. There's about 1,200 years of horror. I don't think the civilization went down in a single day and night. I think there were survivors. I think bits of it were left. I think their project was to restart civilization. And I suggest very strongly that where they tried to mount that project was amongst the hunter-gatherers who coexisted in the world with them at that time. We ourselves are an advanced civilization, at least that's what we call ourselves, and we coexist in the world with hunter-gatherers. It's not an odd idea that an advanced civilization and hunter-gatherers should coexist, and there is separation between us and the Amazonian hunter-gatherers. There are tribes in the Amazon that are uncontacted and that we don't know even exist. If a catastrophe on the level of the Younger Dryas were to occur today, I don't think that our civilization would make it through. We are the spoilt children of the earth. We are just used to having everything laid on. You know, the supermarket shelves are groaning with food. We can get food delivered to our homes. We have roofs over our head. We have shelters. We have clothing. Everything is taken for granted. I guess you're an exception, but very few people in modern Western culture know how to survive. They don't have survival skills. They don't know how to hunt. They don't know how to gather. They don't know how to grow crops because they've handed that responsibility over to others. We live in a society that's highly segmented and specialized, and different people specialize in different things, but nobody has the vast general survival skill that a hunter-gatherer has. So in a global cataclysm, actually, at first counterintuitively, the people who would survive it would be the hunter-gatherers. And an advanced civilization would be smart, if there were survivors, to seek refuge amongst hunter-gatherers, to make that the place where they might try to restart their civilization. And that's why I think that this Australasian DNA signal in the Amazon may be part of the evidence for a sort of outreach effort that was being made by a lost civilization, seeing the disaster coming down on it and realizing that something needed to be done.
Well, it's fascinating to me that the geneticists would rely on the archaeologists, being that the geneticists have the actual DNA that they can examine, where the archaeologists are piecing things together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Little tiny bits of information over the entire landscape.
Yeah.
And then you consider how much information they don't have access to that's in the ground.
I strongly resist the idea that archaeology is a science. I don't think it should be described as
random
What do you
ass
think it
shit.
should be described as?
It's more like a kind of philosophy. It's an attempt to interpret the past based on rather flimsy and limited evidence. And what you find in that interpretation is that the preconceptions of the individuals involved are being imposed upon the evidence, which then turns out to support their preconceptions. And that's not a scientific way of doing things. A scientific way of doing things is testing hypotheses and seeking to falsify them and seeing if they work out.
So the problem is drawing these conclusions and then being too rigid with these conclusions upon the further evidence.
That's my view.
Yeah.
That archaeology has been much too rigid, and that there's a climate of fear in archaeology. I don't mean to pick particularly on archaeologists here. I think this is generally true across other disciplines as well. These days, academics are driven by the need to publish research papers. That's what they build their careers on. If they can get a paper on their bit of research published in Nature or the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, etc., that's good for their careers. But then you confront the gatekeepers in those publications who regard any archaeological idea that is not part of the mainstream accepted consensus with great suspicion and are most reluctant to publish that information.
Now, what is the mainstream, when archaeologists talk about seafaring humans, what do they date that to?
Well, the
Polynesians,
the great seafaring adventure that is accepted by archaeology is called the Polynesian expansion. And it's a remarkable story. And that occurs roughly 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. And those Polynesians were amazing ocean navigators. They could cross distances of thousands of kilometers with pinpoint accuracy. I mean, it's not an accident that the Polynesians found Easter Island. Finding Easter Island is a really challenging project. Easter Island is 2,000 miles from the coast of South America. It's 2,000 miles from the nearest other island, which is Tahiti. It's just a little speck in the middle of the ocean, but the Polynesians found it and settled there and appear to have brought a reproductively viable population there and appear to have made voyages back and forth. But that was 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. That was not 12,800 years ago. And this is where archaeology's adamant position that ocean voyaging was begun by the Polynesians and that there was no major ocean voyages before that, I think needs to be strongly questioned, and it needs to be strongly questioned in the light of this DNA evidence from the Amazon rather than rejecting the evidence. An attempt should be made to consider what that might mean.
Well, it's interesting because we know that the Egyptians had boats.
Yeah.
And so, if there were boats 4,500 years ago, why do we think that they didn't try them out in the ocean? That doesn't make any sense, especially if they existed 1,000 years prior, which is also possible.
Archaeologists wouldn't argue that the Egyptians had boats, but that is still within the framework of accepted history. It's the notion of a global navigating culture in the Ice Age that archaeologists can't swallow. It's a subject that I've kept on coming up against over a number of years. I think the best evidence for it is ancient maps, which show the world as it looked during the last ice age. I first explored this in Fingerprints of the Gods, and I've touched on the mystery again, and I have an appendix on the subject in this book, because I think these are very important. We're talking about maps that were drawn roughly between the 1300s and the 1700s. In other words, in relatively recent history. However, these maps were largely based on much older source maps, which they copied. And we can say that for sure, because one of the famous maps is the Piri Reis map, which was created by a Turkish admiral called Piri Reis in the year 1513. Actually, only a corner of his map has survived. It was originally a world map. We now just have a bit that shows the east coast of South America and North America and the west coast of Africa. Piri Reis writes in that map that it is in his own handwriting that he based it on more than 100 older source maps, some of which had come from the Library of Alexandria. In other words, that maps had been, when the Library of Alexandria had been destroyed in the 4th century AD or whenever it was, some of its contents had been rescued and brought to Constantinople, which became the Turkish capital, and Piri Reis had access to those maps, and he incorporated information from those maps on his maps, as well as incorporating more recent navigational information. And this is one of a whole category of maps which are extremely hard to explain. All of them based on older source maps, now lost, all of them incorporating extremely precise relative longitudes and latitudes. Latitude is not that difficult a technological feat, but longitude is a difficult technological feat. Longitude involves a chronometer. It involves knowing the time at the place you began your voyage and the local noon as well, and calculating the difference between them. You need a chronometer that will keep accurate time at sea with the motions of a ship. And it's just a plain fact that our civilization did not invent such a chronometer until the late 18th century. Before that, we didn't know what longitude we were at, and ships were constantly sailing unexpectedly into coastlines that they thought were hundreds of miles further away. So the discovery of the technique to do longitude was a major civilizational advance. Its presence in maps based on much older source maps that actually show the world as it looks during the last ice age, suggests that somebody during the last ice age was mapping the world and had mastered the technique of calculating longitude. Classic example of these maps, and I make a point of this, is what's called the Pinkerton World Map, which was drawn in the year 1818, and it was based on the latest navigational information at that time. I reproduced that map in the book. What's missing from the map, entirely missing, is Antarctica. There's just a hole at the bottom of the world. There's nothing there. And the reason there's nothing there, there's another Pinkerton map that shows that. The reason that you'll need to find one that's centered on Antarctica. The reason that Antarctica is not there is that our civilization hadn't discovered Antarctica in 1818. So they couldn't authentically put it on a map in 1818. Actually, we discovered it in 1819, and that's when it starts appearing on modern maps. The problem is that Antarctica appears repeatedly on these much older maps, and it appears in the right place, and a bit bigger than it is today, but very much as it looked during the last ice age. So what all of this suggests to me is that the world was mapped and explored by a global seafaring culture with a level of technology that was at least equivalent to ours at the end of the 18th century during the ice age.
Wasn't there also a map of Greenland that showed it underneath the ice?
Yes, there are. And another intriguing thing, I mentioned the Piri-Reis map just now. Shown on the Piri-Reis map, lying off the east coast of North America, is a large island with a row of megaliths, like a road of megaliths, running up the middle of it. That island is in the exact place of the Grand Bahama Banks.
Is this one?
Yeah, it is. But can I point it out to you because
Sure,
the map
sure.
It's there.
That's right there.
Okay.
It's great that you can bring this up, Jim.
It's amazing.
So this island is sitting there off the southeast coast of North America.
Look at the way they used to draw things back then, too.
And what you see running down the middle of it is this road-like feature of megaliths. I'll point them
Yes,
out again.
I see right there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now the thing is, there was a long period of my life when I did a lot of scuba diving, and I was looking at underwater structures. And one of the sites I dived on was the Bimini Road, which is in the Grand Bahama Banks. And the Bimini Road is exactly where that island is. And here's the issue. I don't care whether the Bimini Road is natural or man-made. For me, the mystery is that it is shown above water on that map. And the last time it was above water was thousands and thousands of years ago. So for me, this is all evidence that we shouldn't dismiss the possibility that our ancestors had achieved a level of technology where they could explore and map the world's oceans. We shouldn't dismiss that.
There it is right there. So we don't know what those stones are or how they were created, but boy, do they look artificial.
That's Yonaguni in Japan we're looking at now. But
Go back to that image, Jimmy, the last image that we were just looking at. Look at that. I mean, that looks so man-made.
And you can see that it's rather like the pattern that's shown on the island in the map.
How deep is that today?
Oh, it's not very deep. It's about 20 feet.
But we think that was above water at some point.
It was definitely above water during the last ice age. When it finally went underwater, may have been as late as 8,000 or 9,000 years ago.
Is there anything else compelling that's in the immediate area that seems to indicate that there was some sort of a man-made structure?
Well, nobody's looked for it. And the whole effort of archaeology has been to dismiss the significance of the Bimini Road.
How would they dismiss that?
Well, they say it's just
to me.
They say it's totally natural.
Come on, is it? Go back to that image again. Listen, but
this is the argument.
Go back to that image that we just saw.
Yeah.
Like, are you sure?
As somebody who spent a lot of time diving on the Bimini Road, I can tell you I absolutely do not think it's natural. I think it's a man-made structure. But the argument is that it's a kind of beach rock that forms in these blocky formations.
Does it? Is that
yes, beach rock does form in blocky formations. But here I believe that the beach rock has been used as a construction material. But I repeat, the key issue is not whether the Bimini Road is man-made or not. The key issue is that it features on a map above water. And that is a dating project. That tells us that somebody was mapping that bit of the world when it was above water. And
Jamie,
that
go back to that
takes us back a long way into the past.
The one that you just pulled up. Yeah, look at that one.
That's a stunning place. It's an amazing sight.
It's just like the odds of that being in that order with those uniformly sized rocks for How long is that?
Oh, hundreds of feet. It's a huge. It's actually shaped like the letter J. It's a giant underwater structure. It's really an enormous thing, and very beautiful to dive on. And there's lots of very gentle, sweet nurse sharks down there that you can play with.
So that looks much more like random.
That's more random, and bits of it do look more random, and bits of it look highly constructed. I would not seek to claim that the Bimini Road is absolutely man-made. My claim about the Bimini Road is it's really fucking weird that it appears on a map above water, a map that was drawn in 1513 based on older source maps.
Now, when they found that ancient Greek computer thing, what is that called?
The Antikythera mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, that testifies to a lost navigational skill that we have not taken account of before.
Incredibly complex, and it took a long time for them to figure out what that even is.
Yeah.
What do they think that is now?
It tracks the movements of the planets. It's a navigational device. It's a geared, cogged system that allows you to track the passage of time and figure out where you are. It's some kind of navigational device. It's not fully understood.
And how old is that?
I think that goes back to Greek times. I'm guessing here because the Greek times are not of great interest to me, but I'm thinking around about 500 BC.
So at least 2,000 years old, 2,000 plus, and we know that there had to be more than one of these things.
Yes, you can't have something like that without a vast effort behind it.
Yeah.
Human beings were working on creating this geared and cogged machinery that reflected the patterns.
Oh, is that a recreation of it?
That's a recreation of something like it. Yeah.
Can you buy one of those? It looks like you buy that, dude. Fine. Bookmark that. We need one right there, right next to the plasticells.
So such a thing is a cultural artifact which doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It has to have a context. It has to have a background. And again, my suggestion would be perhaps a secret technology. It's very odd that very few of these have been found, and it may be that ship owners and navigators in Greek times were extremely careful about who they shared this technology with.
Of course.
It may have been as top secret as nuclear power is in our world today.
Oh, that makes sense.
But the fact is that then we have to. It exists. It's real. It's there.
Yeah.
And then we must consider what's behind it. What led to that? Is that just the latest manifestation of something that goes much more deeply back into human culture? And I think that is. I suppose my main message is that we have a so far untold backstory, that we're concentrating entirely on the front story, and the backstory is missing, very largely missing from the picture. And what I've tried to do is to fill in bits of the backstory.
Do you have anything in this book about the Olmecs?
No, not really. I mentioned them briefly. I explored the Olmec mystery in considerable depth.
Can you explain that to people that maybe
in Fingerprints of the Gods? Yes. So it's considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America. Everybody's heard about the Aztecs. Everybody's heard about the Maya. But before the Aztecs and before the Maya, there were a culture who are referred to as the Olmecs. Again, we don't know what they called themselves. That's what the Aztecs called them. They called them the Olmecs, and it means the rubber people because that rubber-producing area of Mexico. They worked in giant megalithic constructions. What they're most famous for is these huge carved human heads, which can be on a scale of up to 20 to 25 tons in weight, and which have curious features which have been interpreted variously as Polynesian, African, don't look like classic Native American features. But one of the things I've realized is that there is no classic Native American feature. That Native Americans are have a very complex genetic story with very many different elements brought into it, and we shouldn't be necessarily surprised by the supposedly non-Native American look of these Olmec heads.
What do we think those helmets were that they were wearing?
Nobody knows, because no physical example of such a helmet has ever been found, just like no physical example of an Egyptian pharaoh's crown has ever been found. All we see is the stone reproductions of them.
Do they universally wear these helmets in these stone reproductions?
They pretty much all wear these helmets in the Olmec stonework. There's another fascinating figure from La Venta, one of the Olmec sites, which is the earliest ever image of a plumed or feathered serpent. The feathered serpent is a famous icon in Central America. Quetzalcoatl, who's the god of peace, the bringer of civilization, who is associated, for example, with the famous pyramid of Kukulkan, which is just another name for Quetzalcoatl at Chichen Itza, where on the spring equinox a shadow effect creates the image of a serpent coiling down the stairway and joining with the carved head of the serpent. But there's the image from Leventa. That's the earliest image of a plumed serpent in the Americas. And sitting in the middle of it, and I made a big deal out of this because I think it is a big deal in Magicians of the Gods, sitting in the middle of it is this human figure who's holding this strange bag in his hand. And it's just a fact that those identical bags are found in ancient Sumer in the hands of individuals who were considered to be civilization bringers, and they also show up on Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe. I call them man bags. And in that case, at Göbekli Tepe, we know they're at least 11,600 years old. So I wonder if we're looking at a sort of badge of office of a group of civilizers who traveled around the world trying to bring back to life a lost civilization and pass down. I deploy a concept in this book that I actually got from Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is the author of the book called The Selfish Gene, and he's not one of my favorite people because he's a materialist reductionist, and he doesn't believe in spirit or any mystery in life, that we're just accidents of chemistry and biology.
He also has no psychedelic experience.
And he's had no. I did challenge him at a public event to go have a dozen sessions of ayahuasca. And
just
still
take acid once.
Oh, just once would be enough. But he has an excellent out because, and sadly, he's had a stroke, so he has a good excuse for not doing that. But he's a clever man, and one of his concepts that he's introduced into human culture is the concept of the meme. We're all, I think, familiar with that word. Genes are physical reproductive mechanisms. They reproduce themselves down the generations. They replicate, they multiply, they're passed on from one individual to another. Memes are cultural objects, cultural ideas that are passed on and replicate and reproduce themselves. And what I see right across the Americas and right across the old world as well is a set of memes that involve the sky, that involve the ground, that involve geometry, that involve notions of life after death. And I think the only way to explain these is that they have been inherited from an earlier culture that was in some way connected with the ancestors of all of these cultures. I think that's what we're looking at in the Amazon. We're looking at a meme which was deliberately created. Once you mobilize a population to start creating huge geometrical structures, you are also facilitating many other possibilities that an organized population allows. I think that's what happened at Göbekli Tepe. I think that's why they created the megalithic site there, to mobilize the local population of hunter-gatherers, to give them a project to do, to engage them, and in the process of engaging them, to teach them the skills of agriculture, which are fundamental to any concept of civilization. And it's weird the way agriculture just suddenly appears in Göbekli Tepe. And there's huge agricultural mysteries in the Amazon as well. May I share a couple of those mysteries with you?
Before you do that, though, can you pull up that image from Göbekli Tepe of Pillar
43? Pillar 43 in Enclosure D.
I would like to see that guy holding that bag. That is really fascinating.
It's the bags are in a row along the top of the pillar. It's Pillar 43 in Enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe.
Is there an image of that online that's available? Oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, there's the bags.
So there's the bags in a row along the top. It's the same sort of square-shaped bag with a curved handle that you find on the earliest image of the pillar of the feathered serpent, and that you find. No, you have to go above that, Jamie. Just a little bit higher up the pillar. Those bags, right at the top there. It's odd that this symbol crops up in many different cultures and tends to be associated with
What's the mainstream interpretation of those bags?
There is no mainstream interpretation of those bags. That's my interpretation of those bags, which I freely confess. That's how I read them. I'm intrigued by the anomaly that the similar bag turns up in the hands of the Quetzalcoatl figure and turns up in Mesopotamia repeatedly. In the hands of the individuals who are called the Apkalu, the magicians of the gods, the bringers of civilization.
And the plumed serpent, Quetzalcoatl it's an Aztec god, right? And
Quetzalcoatl is an Aztec god, but the Aztecs acquired him from earlier cultures. The very fact that an image of the plumed serpent is given such priority in Olmec culture tells us that that system of ideas was present during Olmec times, which takes us back at least to 1500 BC, probably quite a bit earlier than that, whereas the Aztecs are 1500 AD, so there's 3,000 years between the Aztecs and the Olmecs, and that same system of ideas is running through all of those cultures.
And the Mayans had a name for it as well?
Kukulkan.
And what do you think that plumed serpent was?
I think it's very clear from the accounts that have survived that what he's associated with are two things in particular. One of them, he's a god of peace. He's not a war god. And the other thing that he's primarily about is giving the gifts of civilization. This is what you human beings need to know in order to move on to the next level. That is the function and the role of Quetzalcoatl, and there are very similar, we could refer to them as civilizing heroes, who are found in other cultures and other locations. Osiris in Egypt plays that role as a bringer of civilization. There's hardly a culture in the ancient world that doesn't remember a time far back in remote prehistory when some kind of supernaturals or advanced human beings, and I prefer the latter, that some kind of advanced human beings were involved in a project to disseminate civilization. I mentioned the Tucano in the Amazon, who are big drinkers of ayahuasca. The Tucano have a fascinating origin myth. They say that the origin myth states specifically that their ancestors were brought to the Amazon. They were brought to the Amazon by a group of supernaturals who included the daughter of the sun and an individual called the helmsman who steered the serpent canoe in which this settlement mission in the Amazon was performed. And what these so-called supernaturals did was they brought the ancestors of the Tucano to the Amazon, and they showed them the best places to settle, the best places where they might find hunting, the best places where they might create a village, the best places for agriculture. And then they left. But they left them behind one gift, and that gift was ayahuasca. Wow. That's the story of the origin myth of the Tucano. And it sounds to me rather like the other side of the story of that DNA signal in the Amazon, that a group of people were deliberately settled in the Amazon by human beings who they chose to regard as supernaturals. That's what makes sense of it to me.
When I interrupted you to talk about Quetzalcoatl, what were you about to say?
I can't remember.
Oh.
I'm in California. I've been smoking lots of dope, you know.
We were talking about different things in the Amazon. Should we rewind and figure out what we said?
Yeah, the serpent god you were talking about.
Before Quetzalcoatl, before that. I have another question. The Olmecs, you were talking about the genetics of these people that live in Native Americans, that they vary widely. But the Olmecs seem to have very similar features, the thick lips, the wide noses. Why do we think that is?
Well, this is part of a curious mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery. It's been known by archaeologists for quite a long time that there are anomalous skulls in parts of Brazil, which appear to show very strongly Polynesian or African features, very much like the features that we see on the Olmec heads. And a number of archaeologists who got into trouble with their colleagues for this have used that to argue many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, that the settlement story of the Americas is much more complicated than we've realized. And what the DNA is doing is it's telling us that there was something really weird happened with settlement. You see, what happened with those African or Polynesian-looking skulls was that they were tested for DNA when DNA technology was not as advanced as it is today. And what that DNA showed was that they were more closely related to modern Native Americans than they are to any other people in the world. So the notion that there was some connection with Polynesia or Africa was dismissed. But now that we have very firm evidence of an Australasian genetic signal, Australian Aborigines Papua New Guinea Melanesians with those kind of features. Now that we have the genetic evidence that is found in the Amazon, we have to go back to that old evidence and reconsider it.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to find out what that is. They've always fascinated me. The Olmecs, it's always been such a strange image.
Fuck you.
The large heads with the helmets on them, and how do they universally look like that? I mean,
all of the features are very, very similar.
Wow.
They're very, very, very similar.
And always with the helmets.
And almost always. I won't claim that every single Olmec head has a helmet on it, because I think I've seen one that didn't. It's quite a while ago since I explored the Olmec area. But what's fascinating about them is they are supposedly the first high civilization of Central America, that they create structures on a massive scale, that you can see connections between them and the later Maya. That whole mystery of the Mayan calendar was clearly inherited from the Olmecs. It wasn't something the Maya made up. The Olmecs used that same symbolism. So the Mayan calendar is actually an Olmec calendar. And if we then consider the possibility that the Olmecs may just be the latest, the earliest surviving manifestation of that calendar, it could go back much further than that.
Do you plan on having any debates with people that oppose these ideas?
Well, it was interesting on your very show, Joe, to have the debate that involved Michael Shermer, who's the editor of the Skeptic magazine, and some colleague of his who came in online, who I got a bit annoyed with, and myself and my great friend and colleague, the genius Randall Carlson. I felt that was a very useful debate. I felt that it's possibly the first time that those of us on the alternative side of the argument about history were given an opportunity really to put our evidence forward and to confront so-called skeptics. Well, it's so-called, that's what he calls himself, Michael Shermer, with this evidence. And obviously I'm biased, but I don't feel that he fielded the situation particularly well. I don't think mainstream archaeology came out of that looking really good. I think it came out of that looking rather ignorant and uninformed. And a man like Michael Shermer, who is a professional skeptic, cannot begin to match the knowledge of a man like Randall Carlson, who has devoted his whole life to walking the walk of the geology of the end of the Ice Age in North America. And that showed on that debate. So I think the debate was worth doing. I think it showed that the alternative side isn't just wishy-washy stuff out there on the fringes of things, that there are those of us working in this field who are using really solid information, and who our project is to rewrite history. And we're not going to do that with slight information. It has to be solid information. I think we had the opportunity on your show to say that solid information is there. I'm not claiming it was a complete victory for the alternative side. Michael Shermer is a smart guy, and he put forward some good arguments too. And there were constructive aspects of that debate, which I appreciated. I'd like to see much more engagement and much more positive approach. I wish the skeptics, welcome to their skepticism, but I wish they'd be less hateful, less full of derision, less despising.
Well, they're so defensive with their ideas.
And so defensive with their ideas, when the possibility is there for a constructive debate, you know.
Well, what's interesting to me is that as this evidence piles up, and it seems to be continuing to pile up, as more like these impact sites and more of this ancient civilization material gets unearthed, it's almost insurmountable.
Yeah, it's almost, and this is how paradigms shift. I mean, everybody's familiar with the concept of a paradigm shift, and there's a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, which outlines what a paradigm shift is, where an established model in some discipline of science that has been in control of people's thinking for a very long time suddenly falls apart. And it doesn't fall apart suddenly. What happens is that there's an accumulation of evidence which that model cannot explain. That paradigm cannot explain it. It seemed like a great paradigm at one point, but then it doesn't explain this. And then it doesn't explain like like the paradigm that says that megalithic architecture is only 6,000 years old and that the first megalithic architecture was in Malta, that can't explain the massive megalithic site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey 5,500 years before that. It's evidence like that, the slow accumulation of evidence that the existing system cannot explain, that at an eventual point, no matter how strongly the advocates of the existing system hold on to it, no matter how determined they are in their defense, no matter what dirty tricks they may choose to deploy to undermine their opponents, sooner or later the evidence overwhelms them and the paradigm goes down and you have a new way of thinking. And that is the story of science, and it is a story that I think we're at a tipping point in our understanding of the past of the human species.
Bro.
I am not saying really that I am 100% right. I believe that what I'm doing that's worthwhile is I'm asking questions about the past that haven't been asked enough. I'm putting archaeologists on the spot and demanding that they explain themselves. I don't claim that I'm right. I'm offering an alternative theory, and my objective is to get people to think for themselves, to think about this stuff, and not to accept the voice of authority as the sole medium of truth. That's what I've tried to do.
Have you had any archaeologists review any of this work and change their opinions?
No.
No.
I haven't. But what I have found, and I found it interestingly during the research trips for America before, is a younger generation of archaeologists who are in the field. And they are quite different from the older generation of archaeologists who were running the whole scene 25 years ago.
Of course.
Now we have a very different younger generation, a younger generation that has been exposed to open-minded thinking, that has been exposed to the internet, that itself, as part of the general pattern of the younger generation, is suspicious of authority. I'm meeting young archaeologists on sites. For example, I met a couple of really amazing young minds on a site called Blackwater Draw in Arizona, New Mexico, where one of the first Clovis sites. The young archaeologists I met there were incredibly open-minded and really willing to consider extraordinary possibilities about the past, and privately admitted to me that they'd read my books.
Well, that's where I get the hope. I get the hope in this young generation that is growing up with the internet, that does understand that there's a lot more out there than just what they're being taught in schools.
Yes, yeah. This is where the hope lies, and it lies in every area, and it's why one of the intriguing things that has happened with me, and your show is an important part of this, is that when I go around giving public events, doing a public presentation of my work, the demography of the audience is extremely interesting. And this is true whether I'm giving the talk in Britain, whether I'm giving it in Canada, whether I'm giving it in America. Part of the audience are older people who read me in the 1990s, who got onto my work with Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, and they've stuck with me, and they've carried on reading my work. But another part of the audience, a very big part of the audience, consists to a large extent of young people, most of whom are men, but there are women amongst them as well. And what those mainly young men come up to me and say at the end of the event is, we first encountered your work on Joe Rogan's show, and it completely opened our minds. It changed it. I've had so many young men say, this has changed my life. And then I asked myself, well, why should a different take on the past change people's lives? Why should people feel that their lives have been changed by a different take on the past? Which I add they would not know about unless you'd had the good grace to bring me on your show. These ideas would not be known, but they are known because of the amazing outreach of your show. And the answer to that question, why does it change a person's life, is that once we realize that we have been misinformed about our past, that everything that we've built our idea of who we are upon and of where we're going as a culture may be founded on falsehoods and perhaps even deliberate lies, once that is realized, then all the questions about the nature of the society we live in become open. And young people are feeling the need to take an independent path, not to follow the path that has been set down for them by previous generations. And in some way, and I'm very gratified to hear this, the fact that I'm an elder now, I'm 69 next birthday, the fact that
You look great.
Thank you. The fact that I, as an elder, have consistently pursued an independent path, have been willing to put up with the shit that's been thrown at me over the years, but have stuck to my guns and have continued to add new information to the dossier of information that I put forward. That is, and I'm encouraged to see this, that's found as inspiring by younger people. And what better gift could an old guy hope to leave to the world than a younger generation who feel inspired by that person's work to change the world?
Well, I'm very, very thankful that I could introduce people to you, because your first book that I read of you, Fingerprints of the Gods, changed my view of the world. I mean, I remember putting that book down after I was finishing, going, wow, like if he's right, like this whole thing is a mess.
Yeah, a complete mess. Because our idea of who we are is very much founded in our idea of who we were. And I think one of the mistakes that's made in our civilization is that we are very conceited, we're very big-headed, and we tend to view the whole story of history as though it's a project that leads to us, that we're what it's all about. And I think what is how can I put it, undermining of the existing system about a new take on the past is the notion that we're not what it's all about at all. That there may have been an earlier civilization that reached a high level of advancement, perhaps different from ours, but nevertheless an advanced civilization, which was just taken out of the story completely by a global cataclysm. Then we suddenly realize that in a way we're here accidentally, that it's not been a process that's been all about us, and that if we've been misinformed about how we got here, then we need to get the true information about what's going on. So these are in a way profoundly revolutionary ideas. They do lead people on a path of inquiry that leads to questioning of everything.
And our fears that you were just discussing earlier about how soft we are in comparison to past civilizations